Welcome, guys, to part 3 of What If an OC Reborn in KIRIGAKURE village with dual KekkaiGenkai bones, a nice release. If you enjoyed this series, drop a like down below. It only takes a second, and it's free, and while you are down there hit that subscribe button. Remember to check out the author of this fantastic fanfic. Link in the description. Having said that, let's get into it.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Faina had noticed the village hadn't sent him on any missions as of late. Not that he minded, of course, it merely gave him more time to train and master his abilities best he could. That all changed when he received a summons to an ANBU captain's meeting. Hatsu Takagi delivered the order. He was one of Faina's most loyal subordinates, after all, he has saved his life. The captain's meeting. Faina said as he read the order. That's right, Captain Yuki. Orders from the head captain himself. Hatsu said before he excused himself to attend to other matters. I've never been to a captain's meeting before, Faina said, trying to recall who the other ANBU captains even were. The meeting was being held in an hour, so Faina decided he should go home and prepare his gear. Using his body flicker to disappear, moving extremely quickly to get home as fast as he could. Once Faina arrived at his home, he got his gear all laid out trying to decide what he should take. In the end, he went for his basic mist flak jacket and his black ANBU robes. It was what most hidden mist tracker shinobi wore, the only difference was the mask. The mask symbolized his rank among the ANBU, and it was how the mist could tell what position you held. It was a white hunter mask with 3 blue claw marks racing from the bottom. That should do it, Faina said as he pulled on his striped pattern forearm protectors standard of the hidden mist. They were slash-proof and protected the wrists and arms from blades and other sharp things. Faina took a quick look in the mirror, taking in his appearance before heading out. He noticed he was slowly getting taller, and his black hair was still shoulder length for the time being. Faina placed his mask on as he walked out of his home, disappearing into the mist. The meeting was taking place at the ANBU headquarters that was located in the Mizukage's building itself. Faina had been here many times before as it was where he usually reported for missions or new gear. Usually damaged due to his training. As Faina darted across the rooftops of the hidden mist, he could see that the streets were quiet as usual. The village was still a bleak place for most to live, but most didn't have a choice. There was a lot of tension and unrest among the Land of Water at the moment. The nation was still recovering from the civil war, and tensions between the Land of Wind and Land of Water were at an all-time high. The Mizukage's ruthless reign over the land was starting to be questioned, his methods frowned upon by many, including the daemon of the Land of Water. Faina arrived at the meeting place. There were 2 guards stationed on the entrance, each bowed their heads as Faina walked into sight. "Welcome, Captain Yuki," one of them said. Faina nodded to the guards as he entered the building, and made his way to the meeting chambers. Heading up the stairs and along a few corridors, he finally reached his destination. Again 2 more guards were stationed on the door. They nodded and opened the doors for Faina to enter, not saying a word. Faina noticed he was the last to arrive as he took in the appearance of the other ANBU captains dotted around the room. Faina recognized Zabuza without even trying. He wore the standard mist flak jacket and ANBU robes with bandages wrapped around his face like he always had. He was sat on a chair with his legs crossed on the table, not looking impressed as he watched Faina enter the room. "Ah, Captain Yuki, you got the message then," a familiar voice said. Faina turned to see Ao walking over to greet him. It had been a while since Faina had last seen him. Taking his mask off, Faina greeted him. "Yes, sorry I'm late, I didn't receive the news until an hour ago," Faina said. Faina could see 3 others in the room, 2 of which he recognized. One was Kisame Hashigaki. He was stood at the head of the large table in the middle of the room. Faina could tell at one look he was powerful even before getting his hands on his famous sword. His current rank and reputation already saying as much. "So you are Captain Yuki?" a female voice said, catching Faina's attention. Faina turned to look where the voice came from. It was Maid Terran Plus. She looked younger, about 18 years old. Her long red hair that she had in the anime was shorter, only a bit longer than shoulder length. Faina couldn't help notice how attractive she was, and it made him a little nervous. He turned to greet her, smiling at her. "Nice to meet you, and you are?" he asked, being polite. "I thought with a reputation like yours you would be older, no?" she asked, ignoring his question, looking down at him. Faina rubbed the back of his head with a nervous laugh. "Well." He was cut off as Maid continued to talk. "I like younger men anyway. The name is Maid Terran Plus," she said as she blew a kiss at Faina, causing him almost to blush a little. It didn't help that her rather broad cleavage was a little exposed. She wore a tight low-cut black ANBU top that left her shoulders and upper cleavage exposed. She also wore the standard mist flak jacket, with a black skirt leaving her legs bare, except for her standard shinobi footwear with shin guards. "Don't pay any attention to her," Ao said, rescuing Faina's from her. "What was that?" Mei said, looking at him angrily. Final noticed one other man in the room, someone he had never seen before. He wore the standard Mist Ambu gear and sat quietly in one of the chairs, his arms folded across his chest. He made eye contact with Final before looking away in what Final believed was disgust. Kisum cleared his throat, getting the attention of everyone in the room before he spoke, silencing Mei and now arguing with each other. Should we start this meeting, or do you want to waste my time even more? He said menacingly. Everyone nodded, walking over to take a seat. Mei patting her hand on a chair next to her, winking at Final again. She clearly enjoyed toying with him, but he smiled a little awkwardly and sat down anyway, Mei smiling as he did. Don't be nervous, Captain Yuki, I'm just playing with you, she said as she crossed her legs, causing his cheeks to turn a little red. Final smiled nervously and turned away, catching Kisum's glare. Final put a serious face on as his eyes locked with Kisum's in an intense staring contest for what seemed like too long time before Kisum spoke, a sharp-toothed smile coming to his lips. You are probably wondering why you have been summoned. After all, there has never been a meeting between Ambu captains like this before. The other captains didn't look impressed, other than Mei, who had a small smile on her face. Just get to the point, Kisum, Zabuza said, clearly pissed that he was here. You insolent pup, how dare you speak to your commanding officer like that? The other Ambu captain that Final had never seen before said. He was an older man, Final guessing he was in his late 30s. Zabuza scoffed as he pulled his legs off of the table. You got a problem with me, old man? Zabuza shouted, giving off a murderous roar. The other Ambu captain stood to his feet enraged. I will teach you a lesson, demon. He scoffed as he said the word. Now, boys, Mei said, gaining both of their attention, calming them down. Final had heard the stories of her background. She was pretty famous for her abilities, as she also possessed 2 KekkaiGenkai, and had graduated from the academy at the age of 9. Beautiful and extremely dangerous. Just like himself, she had survived many battles through the war, and made a name for herself becoming a captain of Ambu. Zabuza slapped his legs back onto the table, crossing his arms over his chest. Whatever. Kisum waited for it to quiet down before he started talking again. Anyway, as I was saying, Lord Mizukichi has decided to transfer me to work under Fuguki Tsukazin directly. As such, one of you will be taking my position as head captain of the Ambu. The room remained silent as everyone waited for Kisum to start talking again. It was not uncommon for a captain of the Ambu to leave his role to work directly under one of the 7. Well, currently only the 3. There were still 4 slots open in the famous ranks, after Might Dai of the Hidden Leaf had killed the others, and they had yet to be filled. Only Juzo, Raika and Fuguki had survived. It was amazing they had even made it back, as Final knew how powerful the 8 gates were, a testament to their abilities as members of the 7 Swordsmen of the Mist. Ao. You will be taking my place. That is an order from the Mizukichi himself. Ao nodded. I am honored, he said, not showing any emotion. Lord Mizukichi also wants a full report from each captain in regards to the strength of your units. Why so, suddenly? Mei asked, seeming a little confused. He didn't say, Kisum said bluntly. Kisum passed sealed documents to each of the captains, all except Final. These are your orders from above, Kisum said as he passed the last one out. Final was a little surprised as he didn't have one, but decided to stay quiet. Captain Yuki. The Mizukichi wants to see you in his office after this meeting. It seems he has a mission to give you directly, Kisum said, giving Final a sharp grin. Final nodded, trying not to show any surprise on his face. But he knew whenever he was summoned to the Mizukichi's office, it was never for something easy. The last time was to become the Six Tails host, and Final couldn't help but wonder what it would be this time. Are we done here? Zabuza said, standing up looking in a rush to leave. Yes, you may leave now. Kisum nodded. Zabuza didn't waste any time as he quickly left the room, not wanting to stick around to chit-chat. Kisum also dismissed himself, saying he too had matters to attend to before vanishing. Final also noticed the other Ambu captain leave without saying a word, leaving Final, Ao and Mei alone. Well, Captain Yuki, you had better not keep Lord Mizukichi waiting, Ao said as he placed a hand on his shoulder. You're leaving so soon? Mei said, leaning back on the table seeming sad. Final tried his best to act professional and not fall for her teasing. Yes, I had better not keep Lord Mizukichi waiting. Ao nodded and said his goodbyes. Final placed his mask back on and exiting the room. As he left, Mei gave a seductive smile. So that kid is really the famous Ice Devil of the Mist. I hope I meet him again soon. Ao looked at her, crossing his arms over his chest. Trust me. He's a lot stronger than he looks. He's not as naive as you might think either. Mei licked her lips before standing up and walking out of the room. I look forward to working with him. Final made his way to the Mizukichi's office and entered as told. Once inside, he was met by Yagura and only Yagura. You asked for me, Lord Mizukichi. Final sat down. Yes, come in, Final, he said, turning away from the large window he was looking out of. I have a mission from the daemon, he said, crossing his arms. As you know, tensions are high with the Land of Wind. The daemon has proposed that he sends his daughter to agree upon a peace treaty. Final wasn't convinced. But Lord Mizukichi, is it a good idea? Surely her life will be put at risk. Yagura let his interruption slide as he sat down in his chair. I have tried to warn him, but there is no convincing a politician, Yagura said, resting his chin on his fist. If anything happens to her, it will mean war, Yukura said, his expression cold. I trust I can count on you. Faina didn't say anything for a moment and simply nodded. It will be done. Very good, you will find all the details in the mission report on your way out. Oh, and Faina, do try your best not to let the princess die. Faina walked out of the Mizukage's office and took the mission report for one of the Mizukage's aides. He wasn't impressed and knew this was a bad idea. If the Hidden Sand got the news that the princess of the Land of Water was heading to the capital of the Land of Wind, there was no doubt that they would attack. The Hidden Sand was on bad terms as it was with their daemon, and the country was on the verge of a civil war. The last thing the Land of Wind wanted was a war with the Land of Water, but Faina had a feeling that is what the Hidden Sand wanted. After all, it was a perfect war to generate revenue and get revenge on the Hidden Mist. Faina made his way to the mission's office and placed the mission orders. After that, he summoned his Anbu squad to meet tomorrow for the start of the mission. Faina had already looked over and memorized the mission. It was an A-class, escort and protect the princess to and from the Land of Wind. No Anbu clothing was to be used, and Faina and his squad were ordered to dress as regular jonin. Faina returned home and began preparation for the mission. He knew that there was a high possibility of being attacked and even a possible assassination attempt. But Faina was confident he wouldn't run into anyone he couldn't deal with, which was most likely why the Mizukage had chosen him for the mission in the first place. I should be prepared just in case, he said to himself as he packed some extra gear. Hopefully this goes smoothly. If not, can I count on your help, Seiken? Faina said, closing his eyes so he could talk to the Six Tails. Seiken could see everything that Faina could see and was already aware of the mission at hand. I trust you, Faina. I am at your side no matter what, the Six Tails said with a smile on his face. Faina also smiled as he opened his eyes and finished packing all of his gear. Turning to look at the clock on his table, Faina noticed it was later than he thought. I guess I still have just a little time to practice the jutsu. With that said, Faina bit his thumb, drawing some blood, and made a few quick hand signs. Reverse summoning jutsu, he said, slapping his hand on the floor, vanishing in a poof of white smoke. The morning of the mission had come. Faina was up early, giving him plenty of time to arrive on time. First, he got his gear ready, placing his Miss Flak jacket on and his headband round his head. Next, he reported to the meeting area where he had summoned his team. All four of them were already there, having arrived early. Faina walked over to them and nodded in response to their greetings. Good morning, Captain Yuki, they said. Good morning, everyone, Faina said, looking at them. His team consisted of Hatsu, he was Faina's right-hand man, and they had completed many missions together. Saano, who was a man in his 20s newly assigned to Faina's unit. He was tall and well-built, he had well-groomed black hair and brown eyes. Kaga, who was also in his mid-20s, had also been recently appointed to Faina's unit, and had blonde hair and blue eyes. Last was a girl called Ozawa Mizuki. She was 18 and had become a member of Faina's unit, since he had returned from the Hidden Leaf mission. She was shy and didn't say much, her abilities speaking for her as she was a member of the Mizuki clan. All of them were dressed in their standard Hidden Mist Jonin gear, giving no evidence they were Anbu Black Ops. Just as ordered. Alright team, time to report to the princess. She is staying at the VIP accommodation uptown, Faina said, informing them. His team all nodded in response and followed their captain to the location. Once there, they reported to the guards that stood outside of the building the princess was staying. They were her personal guard from the capital provided by the daemon himself. Faina Yuki, reporting to collect the princess, he said, showing his documentation signed by the Mizukage. The two guards looked at the paperwork for a second before nodding in approval. Just one moment, please, one of them said as the other entered the building. Faina and his team waited patiently, none of them saying much or engaging in chit-chat. Faina was confident that his team were all professionals and would act accordingly for the most part. A few moments later, the guard walked out and held the door open for Faina and his squad. The princess is ready for you, he said, allowing them to enter. Faina nodded, walking into the building. He was met by another guard who escorted him and his squad to the princess's chambers. She was staying in the penthouse on the top floor of the building that was reserved for VIPs only. Once Faina and his squad arrived, they were asked to wait outside for just a moment before being summoned inside. The doors opened, and two servants welcomed them inside to face the princess. The princess was dressed in her formal robes befitting royalty. She was 15 years old with long blonde hair and piercing brown eyes. Yes, please come in, she said in a very well-mannered voice. Faina and the others entered the room and bowed their heads. Greeting Princess Mizuko, Faina said as he raised his head to look at her. She was a pretty young woman, her posture very sharp and her aura demanding the attention of everyone in the room. Yes, nice to meet you. Captain Yuki, I assume, she said, not taking her sights away from Faina. Yes, princess. My squad and I have been assigned to escort you to the Land of Wind, Faina said, looking to his team, who all raised their heads to greet the princess. Nice to meet you all. I trust we shall get along swimmingly, she said as she stood from her chair. Daddy told me I would be given only the best protection. I trust you won't let anything happen to me, Captain Yuki, she said, walking over to Faina, looking him in the eyes intently. You have my word, princess, Faina said, not breaking eye contact. Excellent. Shoji, prepare my things for departure, she said to her servant before retaking a seat. Right away, princess, he said, not wasting any time. You may leave now, Captain Yuki, she said with a smile. Faina nodded. Yes, princess, he said, bowing one last time before he and his squad left the room. Once they exited the building, Hatsu spoke up, not seeming impressed. She seems like all of the other spoiled noble brats to me, he said, crossing his arms over his chest. Sawano gave a hearty laugh. Come now, Hatsu. She is the princess of the land of water, after all. That doesn't make it any better, Hatsu said, not impressed. Kaga was picking his sharp teeth with the kunai, not paying any attention to others, while Ozawa stood quiet as usual. That's enough, you two, Faina said. Our mission is to escort and protect. We should keep our opinions to ourselves, Faina said, silencing them. Sorry, Captain, Hatsu said quickly. While we wait for the princess to get ready, I will go over formations for the mission. The others suddenly became focused on Faina as he explained all of the details to them. Ozawa, you will be at the princess's side at all times. I don't care what time it is, what she is doing, you shadow her every move. Never let her out of your sight. Ozawa nodded in response, not saying anything. The rest of us will position around the princess's caravan in a 360-degree arch. One of us on all sides covering every angle. The others paid close attention as Faina continued to explain the plan. Hatsu, you will take the front leading the caravan using your sensory abilities to help detect possible threats. Kaga and Sawano, you will take the port and starboard sides. Yes, Captain, they each said. I will take the rear, keeping our back safe. I will also keep watch over the whole caravan from the rear. In the event we are attacked, I want Kaga and Sawano to join Ozawa in a manji, close formation around one target. Formation to protect the princess. Hatsu, you will put up a layer of mist to blind the enemy before joining me on a counterattack. The others all nodded in agreement, understanding the plan. No one had any questions, and Faina was glad for it. After all, it was straightforward to understand, and he would have been worried if any of them had failed to comprehend. One last thing, Faina said. Event, we come across an enemy we cannot defeat head-on, I will give the order for plan to Kyaku. Retreat. If this happens, I will stay behind to buy as much time while the four of you escape with the princess. But Captain Yuki, Hatsu piped up, not seeming impressed. No buts, Hatsu. That is an order, Faina said. Hatsu bit his lip but remained silent and nodded in agreement with the others. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Faina said with a smile. The other also agreeing with him. Not long after, the princess's caravan was ready to move out and left the protection of the Hidden Mist village. Faina and the others took up their formations, not expecting any trouble until they left the land of water. After all, the daemon was well loved in this land. The princess's caravan was rather large, and it was clear she didn't like to travel light, bringing many things with her for the journey. She wasn't pleased to have Ozawa with her 24/7, but made her peace with it eventually. The trip was a long and tedious one as they made their way to a private port owned by the daemon himself. What should have been a day's journey would take two with all of the luggage the princess insisted on bringing. Faina was correct that no trouble would follow while they were in the land of water. Everyone seemed to love the princess, and she was met with great respect at each village they passed. Faina had instructed Hatsu to lead the caravan to make camp at a small town that was en route to the port. Here the princess could sleep in an inn, as she would surely refuse to camp outdoors. They arrived just before dark to the village, and the princess's servants made the arrangements for her accommodation. Faina had Kaga check it out first to make sure it was safe. He returned not long after, giving the signal it was all clear, allowing the princess and her maids to leave the protection of her carriage. The entire top floor of the inn had been rented out for the night. Faina had instructed they take shifts to keep guard of the princess through the night, sleeping in the room next to the princess's while they rested. All except Ozawa, who would stay in the princess's room with her. As night rolled in, Faina and the others settled in with some food that had been provided by the inn for them. Kaga was first to take watch, and his stag was coming to an end with Faina's coming next. And then I threw my kunai, popping the water balloon all over his head, Hatsu shouted, getting a laugh from Faina and Sawano. They were each telling stories and were currently on the topic of pranking others. Sawano laughed hard and almost choked on his food. Careful, Sawano, Faina said, giving a small chuckle. It wasn't often that Faina found himself having fun on a mission. In fact, he couldn't remember the last time he had sat down with others and laughed. Captain Yuki, can I ask you a question? Hatsu asked once the laughter faded. Faina looked at his friend and nodded. Of course, Hatsu, what's on your mind? It's about Lord Mizuki, she said, a little unsure if he should continue speaking. It's just, he started. Never mind, he decided to say, dropping the matter. The atmosphere in the room had flipped and everyone remained silent. Don't worry, Hatsu. Things will get better, Faina said as he stood to his feet. Have a little faith, Faina said, giving a confident smile. With that, Faina took his leave to release Kaga from his shift, leaving Hatsu and Sawano alone in the room. How well do you know Captain Yuki? Sawano asked Hatsu. Hatsu smiled. Well enough. It's just I've heard the rumors, Sawano said quietly. Hatsu raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of tea. And what would they be? Well, it's just, you know, the ice devil of the mist. I've heard the stories. Are they really true? Hatsu started laughing, clearing the air. Well, they don't call him that for nothing, Hatsu said with a smile. But I think that's enough gossip about Captain Yuki. It would be best to ask him yourself if you have any questions, Haru said, closing the matter. Meanwhile, Fina decided it would be best to check on Ozawa and the princess before they settled for the night. He knocked on the door, waiting outside for a response. The door was opened by one of the princess's maids, who bowed her head to him a little nervously. Please come in, she said in a gentle voice. Fina nodded. Thank you. He was escorted inside and bowed when he saw the princess. She was sat on her bed, having her hair brushed by another of her maids, wrapped up in her nightgown, her legs bare. Welcome, Captain Yuki, the princess said with a smile. I take it you have come to check on my well-being. Fina raised his head, noticing Ozawa was sat silently in the corner of the room with her legs crossed. Yes, princess, I was just checking in before you rest for the night, Fina said, giving Ozawa a nod. She returned his gesture, letting him know nothing was out of the ordinary. We are perfectly fine, as you can see, the princess said, examining her nails before looking Fina up and down. If you wish to join us for some gossip instead of your kunoichi here, then please be my guest. She is a little on the quiet side. Fina smiled. I'm afraid I have other matters to attend to, princess. Ozawa doesn't like to talk too much, but may I remind you, she is here for your protection and not to gossip, Fina said, bowing his head, winking at Ozawa as he did. Ozawa gave him a nod of appreciation, and with that, Fina walked out of the room, shutting the door. Shame, the princess muttered. She looked over to Ozawa, patting the spot next to her on the bed. Ozawa dear, come here for a moment. Ozawa did as she was told by the princess and sat on the bed, feeling a little uncomfortable. How much do you know about you, Captain Ozawa? The princess asked, seeming very interested. Ozawa looked uncomfortable and gulped. What do you mean, princess? She responded quietly. Come now, Ozawa dear. You must know all about him if he is your commanding officer. I want to know all the juicy details about him. You must spare no detail. Ozawa was clearly uncomfortable, but the princess continued to press the matter anyway. Well, I don't know, Ozawa said, not really sure what to say. Come now, Ozawa. You can tell me, the princess said, placing her hand on Ozawa's, looking into her eyes. How old is he for a start? He still looks so young. His name is famous even among us nobles, you know. Do they really call him the Ice Devil of the Mist? The princess suddenly blurted out. Ozawa was taken back by all of the questions about Fina, and wasn't sure how to answer them herself. I'm not sure, princess. I haven't known him very long at all. I have only heard the rumors myself, Ozawa said, blushing a little. Tell me everything, the princess said excitedly. Fina arrived to take over watch for Kaga, who had taken the first shift. Captain, he said, nodding his head. Fina also nodded in response. Anything, Kaga? Fina asked, taking a seat on the edge of the inn's roof, where they were keeping watch from. No sir, nothing, Kaga said, standing to his feet. Good, go and get some rest, Kaga, Fina said, smiling at him. Kaga nodded and made his way back inside to join the others for some food, leaving Fina alone on the roof. Fina was pretty sure no trouble would come while in the land of water, but he wouldn't take any chances. He pulled out a map from his weapons pouch, and started to study the route they were taking. If all went well, they would arrive at the port tomorrow afternoon, setting sail into the night before arriving in the Land of Fire. Once there, they had permission to cross the border from the daemon of the Land of Fire, who had granted safe passage. It would take a week at the speed they were traveling at before they arrived in the Land of Wind's capital. Fina only hoped that nothing happened along the way that could slow them down. As he sat atop the roof of the inn looking up at the stars, Fina couldn't help but think back on his past so far in this world. He had been born into a war-torn country ruled by fear and corruption. His own clan had shipped him off to war and forsaken him, only to face annihilation themselves. Surviving battle after battle, skirmish after skirmish. Facing death's doors too many times to count, Fina had overcome all of the odds. He smiled as he thought back to his days in the academy. And I thought those days were tough, he said with a smirk. Thinking back to his many battles during the war, all of the encounters he had made in this world so far. So many he had still yet to meet. Fina started to chuckle to himself suddenly as he remembered a very fateful encounter. What is so funny? Seiken couldn't help but ask, overhearing Fina's thoughts. Fina took a moment and regained his composure. Just thinking about a rival of mine, he said, letting the memory play back in his head. Flashback: it had been a full year since Fina had left the academy. He had been shipped off onto the front lines and sent on over a dozen dangerous missions one after the other, all of them he completed against the odds. Word spread around about how small Genin had survived against a battle with the Hidden Leaf. A child of the Yuki clan, unwanted by his own clan. However, Fina wasn't the only famous child of the Bloody Mist. No, there was another who had also made a name for himself. Back to the present time, Zabuza Mamachi, Fina said with a small grin. Who is that, Fina? Seiken asked. Fina smiled. The demon of the mists. Back to flashback. Zabuza had also made a name for himself at the time of their graduation. He had killed over 100 students of the academy, not being a student himself. It was unheard of and had caused an uproar among the instructors, calling the practice of the final exam into question. In the year after, he had made a name for himself, being sent on missions worthy of the nickname that had been given to him. It was sporadic. Final had found himself back in the village for long enough to cross paths with him again, but fate had decided to intertwine the two of them. Zabuza had heard the rumors of Final's abilities, and he didn't like it one bit. He had to know who was stronger. Back to the present time, is he a friend of yours? Seiken asked. You seem to think very highly of him. Final smiled once more before speaking. I wouldn't say, friend. But you're right. Flashback. The air was cold, the ever-present mist surrounding the village, masking it from the outside world. Final had found himself home from the war front, and he appreciated the break. He had taken the date to wander the village and rest his mind. The thought of running away had crossed through his head many times. But sadly he always came to the same conclusion. Where would I go? Who would take me in after what I have done? After what I had to do to survive, he thought. Final knew if he ran away, he would be branded a rogue ninja and hunted like a dog. He had no allies, no help. No other village would take him in. They would take in a traitor to their own village and trust them. As soon as the thought entered his mind, it usually left just as quick. Better the devil you know, sometimes he would often say to himself. This time though, his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden bloodlust in the air. Final had turned down a small street heading back to where he was currently staying while back in the village. Turning to see where the bloodlust was coming from, Final came face to face with Zabuza. From the information Final had been able to collect so far, he had concluded that Zabuza was, in fact, 2 years older than him, making him 12 at this point. Final watched as Zabuza's demon-like aura flared around his frame. His intent to kill as real as the first time he had come face to face with him. I see you're still alive, Zabuza said in a gruff voice. Final smiled, crossing his arms over his chest. You too, I see. Where did they send you? Final asked. Zabuza scoffed. Doesn't matter. What matters is we have a score to settle. Zabuza said as he pulled a kunai out of his weapons pouch. Final was only a little surprised. After all, dead bodies were often found littering the streets here in the bloody mist. No one would question another. Do you intend to kill me, Zabuza? Final asked. Kid Zabuza looked just as demonic as adult Zabuza had looked in the anime. His hair was short and messy, much like when he would be older. His teeth had already been filled down, sharp as blades ready to be used as another weapon. He wore the standard hidden mist gear complete with a flak jacket, just as Final wore. I was hoping you would survive. In fact, I knew you would. Ever since we clasped blades, I've wanted to see which of us is stronger. Zabuza shouted, his heart pumping from the excitement that came before battle. You know what, I want to see who is stronger too. Final said, allowing a bone blade to protrude from his shoulder before taking it in his hand, swinging it around for effect, taking a battle-ready stance. Zabuza was surprised as he watched Final pull his own bone out of his shoulder, but he didn't let it distract him. You're mine. Zabuza shouted as he charged down the street, his kunai raised, and his bloodlust visible. Final charged in too, giving a loud battle cry as the two of them clashed, locking blades in a battle for power. Zabuza pushed forwards hard, using all of his might, overpowering Final, driving him back. Final quickly sidestepped, using Zabuza's own strength against him. Falling forward, Zabuza lost his footing for a mere second, allowing Final to spin with blinding speed, slashing out with his bone blade. But Zabuza was no ordinary shinobi, even at the age of 12. He ducked, dodging the swipe by a hair's length, quickly kicking his leg out, hitting Final's shin, knocking his off balance. You're mine, he shouted as he swiped at Final's throat with his kunai. Final was impressed at his skill, even being forced to use his abilities to a higher degree. Allowing bones to shoot from his ribs, Final stopped Zabuza's arm in its tracks, one of the bones cutting him. Zabuza was able to retreat before getting impaled fully, realizing he couldn't match Final head-on in a match of Taijutsu. Zabuza took a step back, his silhouette fading into the thick mist, leaving no trace of him. Silent killing, Final said, taking a ready stance. Quickly Final burst into a leap, springing off the side of one building and onto another, flipping down into an alley. Final placed his back against the wall, knowing now there was only one way an attack could come from. Final's senses kicked in at the last second, as Zabuza suddenly appeared in the tiny gap behind him, swiping at his with his kunai. Final rolled forwards, and before he could even stand back to his feet, Zabuza was on his again. Final blocked all of the incoming attacks, but was caught by a powerful sidekick to the ribs, which sent him flying into a large rubbish bin. Final didn't have time to complain as Zabuza launched into the air like a lion, going for the kill. Final smiled and allowed bones to protrude from all over his body, halting Zabuza's attack. Is it your only trick? Zabuza said, taunting Final. Final smiled as he clapped his hands together, making a hand sign. No. But you fell for it, he said as large eye smears started to form all around Zabuza, blocking him in the alley with no way out. What the hell is this? Zabuza said, looking around frantically like a trapped rodent. Give up, Zabuza, it's over, Final said as he took a step back, slipping into one of his mirrors. Zabuza pulled out another kunai, so he held one in each hand as he took a low stance. I won't lose. Crystallized smears, Final said as his reflection appeared in the rest of the mirrors. Zabuza was in high gear now as all of his senses were at their peak. Final could see him weighing up every option, every possible plan running through his head, not losing faith in his abilities even once. Zabuza threw a handful of shuriken in all directions before trying to make a break for it. Final watched him move more out of interest than anything else, but decided to halt his escape. Dashing from one mirror to the next, Final caught all of his shuriken in rapid succession, before kicking Zabuza out of the air. Zabuza flipped over, landing hard, not wasting any time trying to get ready to counter Final's counterattack. "I think these belong to you," Final said, throwing all of the shuriken back at Zabuza. The sharp metal objects landed all over the floor, in front of him. His face dropping for the first time as he realized he had no chance of winning. Zabuza dropped to his knees in desperation. His confidence shattered at Final's overwhelming abilities. What are you?" Zabuza asked, his anger fading. Final stepped out of the mirror behind Zabuza and placed a bone blade to his neck. "I am Final Yuki." Zabuza's eyes suddenly opened wide as his rage grew to new limits. His aura grew bigger and bigger until it was clear as day. A true demon had appeared above him now in all of its glory. Zabuza lashed out, slamming a kick into Final's chest. The kick was so strong that Final was sent flying, crashing through his own ice mirror before hitting the ground hard. He had already reinforced his bones, doing so had become second nature now before every battle. But the force of the kick had been so great that his ribs had still cracked. He stood back to his feet, clutching his chest from the blow. Zabuza was hunched over, the demonic aura hovering above him clear as day. "Maybe I underestimated you," Final said, a smile coming to his face. "It won't happen again." He said, his bones slowly spiked out from all over his body once more, including two horns atop his head, the air around him growing colder and colder as his chakra flared to life. The two young ninjas stood face to face, their killing intent so strong that it could be felt all across the village. It was a stalemate, the calm before the storm. Now the two of them were really ready to battle with everything they had. Everything they had used to survive up until this point. It was now or never. "What the hell are you two doing?" a voice shouted from one of the rooftops. More figures suddenly appeared, each one of them dressed as a member of the ambu tracker unit. The leader flipped down, landing in the middle of Final and Zabuza, taking a good look at both of them. "I think that's enough, you two. Unless you want us to finish what you started," the ambu captain said, not seeming impressed. Final nodded and allowed his bones to return inside his body, relaxing his chakra, enabling the air to warm once more. Zabuza, however, didn't seem to care about the arrival of the ambu. All he cared about was to prove he was stronger. "Don't get in my way," he shouted as he ran full speed, charging at Final like a monster. Several water whips suddenly wrapped Zabuza up, preventing him from moving any further. The water whip was a unique tracker technique. The water was stronger than steel, and could hold even the strongest shinobi in binds. Zabuza tried his best to struggle, giving a loud battle cry as he did. The ambu captain nodded to one of the others who suddenly threw a needle. The needle struck Zabuza in the side of the neck, dropping him to the floor unconscious. "That's enough out of him," the ambu captain said. He turned to look at Final and then back to Zabuza. "I don't know what you were fighting about, but save it for the real enemy, eh kid?" Final nodded before turning around, the whispers catching his ears as he walked out of the alley. "Isn't that kid?" "Yeah," the Yuki one, the voice said, as more and more people turned up to see what was going on. "Isn't it a Kekkaigenkai ability?" one of the ambu said to his captain. The ambu captain didn't say anything and just watched as Final walked away. Final walked away, ignored them as he pushed past the crowd that had gathered, merely disappearing into the mist, as if he were never there. And a flashback, "I didn't see Zabuza after that for a long time," Final said with a sigh. "Maybe that was a good thing. It sounds like you would have killed each other," Seiken said. Final laughed before standing to look into the distance. "I think Zabuza became my first friend in this place after that," Final said, placing his hands on his hips. Seiken stayed quiet as could tell Final was letting his thoughts run wild once more. "Who knows, perhaps we will fight again in the future," Final said, sitting back down, stretching his arms into the sky to crack his back. Final suddenly sensed Hatsu coming, but didn't turn to face him. "Is it that time already?" Final said with a smile. "Yes, Captain, I have come to take over your guard," Hatsu replied, not surprised he knew he was there. Final stood up and nodded at Hatsu. "Well, see you in the morning." "Thank you, Captain," Hatsu replied as he settled in to take his turn on guard duty. Final walked back down into the inn, returning to his room to see the others already asleep. "Well, time to settle in," he said as he got into bed, letting his mind relax, and his memories turn into dreams. So far, the journey to the Land of Wind had gone smoothly. The princess had complained a little along the way and had even tried to change course, but Final had managed to get them back on track every time. Now they were only a day's journey from their destination, the capital city of the Land of Wind. Final had reminded his team to remain vigilant now they were in the Land of Wind, knowing an attack could come at any moment. Final was leading the princess's caravan through the desert land. It was scorching hot as the sun was at its highest point in the sky, unforgiving to those who were not accustomed to it. "Captain Yuki," the princess shouted. "Can't you do anything about this god-awful heat?" The princess moaned, even while one of her maids fanned her to help keep her cool. Final gave a forced smile before he spoke. "I'm afraid I can't do much about the sun, princess." The princess scoffed as she fell back into her seat, flailing her legs in the air as she did. Hatsu wasn't impressed but decided to keep it to himself. Final had changed their formation. Now they were in the desert, keeping his team closer together around the princess. Ozawa was still kept with the princess at all times. They had become more friendly towards one another, and Final couldn't help notice. Final and Hatsu led the caravan at the front, while Kaga and Sawano kept a tight watch at the back, just like 4 dots on a dice. Hatsu, you see anything? Final asked. Hatsu had excellent sensory abilities, and Final was relying on him to sense any trouble or danger. No, Captain Yuki, nothing, he said, checking once more. Final was happy with his answer. Turning to check on the others, he could see the princess and Ozawa talking and giggling to each other, which seemed strange. Kaga kept to himself and gave Final a nod when he noticed him looking over at him, which Final returned. Sawano, on the other hand, was chatting to one of the princess's maids, no doubt flirting with her. All seemed well and Final was happy with how everything was going thus far. Ambush! Hatsu shouted suddenly, alerting everyone in the caravan. Final could see a storm of explosive kunai raining down upon them. Quickly he slapped his hands down on the ground, creating an ice dome all around the caravan, to protect them from the fierce rain of metal. The ice dome held, doing its job, taking the brunt of the first assault, even though the ice was weaker, thanks to the intense heat of the sun. Keep the princess safe, Final shouted. He quickly turned to Hatsu. Where are they? Final asked. 2 that side and 2 more to my right, Hatsu shouted as he pulled his sword from his back. Final spun around, dodging a thrust at his head by one of the enemy ninjas. Quickly he grabbed their wrist, twisting it and flipping the ninja onto the ground, before stabbing them in the head with a bone from his hand. It was fast and brutal, but Final didn't have time to worry about that now. He looked over to see Hatsu currently battling one of the others, while 2 more had already broken past and were heading right for the princess. Kaga dived into action, clashing his kunai against one of the enemy shinobis, and they entered into a fierce battle. The enemy all had their faces covered with demon masks, but wore the hidden sand uniform, indicating they were Anbu members. Their target was defiantly the princess, and Final wasn't going to let them have their own way. Hatsu clashed with one of the enemy shinobi who was also armed with a short sword. The 2 seemed evenly matched in kenjutsu, each of them holding their own against the other. Blades clashed and clashed again in a stalemate, until Final suddenly appeared out of the blind side of the enemy shinobi's Phison. His reactions were impressive, and he was able to block Final's thrust, aimed at his midsection. He spun around with superb skill, flicking his sword through the air and changing hands with it, thrusting his blade down hard, impaling Final through his back, forcing him to the ground. Captain! Hatsu shouted as he watched Final get pinned to the ground by the enemy. I don't think so, the shinobi shouted, seeming pleased with his handiwork. To his surprise, Final's body suddenly started to melt as it turned into ice. What in the... He was interrupted as Final's clone exploded, sending shards of ice scattering all over. The assassin was too slow to move out of the way and was impaled by the ice shards, his body falling limp, hitting the sand hard with a thud. Hatsu gave a small grin as he watched what had happened. I should have known better, he said before running to help the others. Meanwhile, Kaga and Sawano were also locked in battle with the 2 remaining assassins, while Ozawa kept a close guard over the princess and her maids, not letting them out of her sight. Kaga span quickly, kicking his leg out at the assassins, trying to sweep him. The assassin was fast though, jumping into the air to avoid the kick. The assassin counter-attacked as he swung his sword, aiming for Kaga's face. Kaga dodged the first strike as he leaned back. The second was much harder to escape, and he was forced to roll back onto the ground. Kaga rolled onto his hands and used them to spring up onto his feet, just in time to block his attacker's strike. The assassin had jumped in hoping to impale him with a swift strike to his chest, but Kaga was able to step to the side, allowing the blade to deflect off his kunai and out of harm's way. Kaga used the deflection to spin, attempting a spinning back fist, but the ninja ducked, avoiding the attack. The enemy grabbed a handful of sand, throwing it into Kaga's eyes, taking him by surprise, and leapt forwards, going for the kill. R. Kaga shouted as the sand blinded him. He swiped with his kunai in all directions, unable to see where the next attack would come from, in a desperate attempt to survive. You are mine, the assassin shouted just before he went for the killing blow, thrusting his blade towards Kaga's heart. At the last second, the assassin stopped dead in his tracks. A white bone suddenly protruding through his chest, killing him instantly. Final had taken his back unnoticed, delivering a fatal blow, saving Kaga's life, dropping the sand ninja's corpse to the ground. Wash your eyes out, Kaga, Final shouted, disappearing as fast as he had appeared. Just one left, Final thought to himself as he dashed through the caravan to aid Sawano. The princess's aides and servants had taken cover and were screaming with panic, as the sounds of battle and steel clashing continued around them. Sawano was battling the last remaining assassin, who was proving to be a handful. Sawano could tell from their build it was most likely a woman, and he already knew she was much more agile than him. Sawano blocked her first 2 punches, but failed to stop the kick that followed. The assailant used it to quickly press her foot off of Sawano's knee, using it as a step to jump into the air, where she delivered another powerful spinning back kick to his face that sent him crashing into the ground. She didn't waste any time as she quickly sped past the civilians who made up the princess's caravan, who screamed in panic and tried their best to stay out of the way. The assassin quickly reached Ozawa and the princess. Jumping him into the air and spinning, she attacked with all of her might. Ozawa was able to block the strike with her own kunai, but the female Anbu was swift. She spun around, hand planting the floor, attempting a spinning heel kick at Ozawa, who only just avoided the blow. The assassin darted forwards with her blade, seeing an opening in Ozawa's defense, and went for the kill. To her surprise, her blade passed right through Ozawa, and her arm got trapped in her body as it partially turned to water. "What is this?" she shouted as she tried to pull free. Ozawa smiled and readied a kunai, ready to counterattack. "I don't think so," the assassin shouted, using her free hand to slap an explosive tag onto a part of Ozawa's body that wasn't liquefied. Ozawa quickly released the assassin and pushed the princess out of the way as she did her best to contain the blast with her body. The assassin was able to jump out of the way of the explosion. While in the air, she noticed that she was the last remaining member of her squad left alive, and so she decided it best to retreat. Faina watched as Ozawa covered the princess, allowing no harm to befall her, and rushed after the assassin, quickly forming hand signs, allowing an ice mirror to develop behind her. "Time for me to retreat," the assassin said as she pulled a smoke bomb out of her weapon's pouch. She raised her arm high into the air, about to throw the smoke bomb onto the ground, when Faina suddenly appeared and grabbed her wrist. "I don't think so," he said with a straight face. The assassin used her leg to kick at Faina's face, but he grabbed her ankle, stopping the kick with ease. The woman seemed surprised and quickly attacked with the sword in her other hand. Faina grabbed the blade, the metal instantly freezing in his grasp. He squeezed hard, shattering the sword before he slammed his fist into the woman's stomach. She suddenly burst into smoke, and Faina was left with his fist impaled in a piece of dead wood that she had switched out with. Substitution. Faina said, a little pissed he had fallen for it. "Hatsu, can you locate her?" Faina said, not wasting any time. Hatsu nodded and closed his eyes as he focused. "She is heading southwest, the direction of Sunagakur, Captain," Hatsu said as he opened his eyes to speak. The panic around the caravan had settled now the enemy had been dealt with. Faina turned to look at one of the corpses, and confirmed they were all hidden sand Anbu. "Those bastards," Sawano said, wiping a bit of blood from his lip. Kaga had also regrouped with the others, having washed the sand out of his eyes. "Captain, does that mean the hidden sand intends to start a war with us?" Hatsu asked. Faina kept a straight face while speaking. "For now, let's get the princess to the capital safely. Once there, we can see what the daemon has to say and get a message to Lord Mizukage." The others nodded in agreement, and Faina dismissed them, telling them to return to their posts. Faina walked over to Ozawa, who thanks to her hydrification technique, was unharmed by the explosive tag. The princess was being tended to by her servants who scattered around trying to keep calm. The princess not looking pleased in the slightest. "Ozawa, are you alright?" Faina asked. She looked at him while taking a sip from her rather large water bottle he had failed to notice. "Why yes, Captain, as long as I keep hydrated, I will be fine," she said in her quiet voice. "Good. Rest up and keep an eye on the princess," Faina said before walking over to the princess. He wasn't even given time to speak as the princess suddenly dived into his arms. "Oh, Captain Yuki. Please tell me they are all dead. You killed them, right?" she blurted out as she wrapped her arms around his body. "Princess P, please let go of me," he said, suffocating under her chest. She did as asked and unwrapped her arms, letting him go. "Who on earth were they? Do they really think they can attack me and get away with it?" she said, changing her tune pretty fast, ignoring the fact her breasts were still firmly pressed against Faina's face. Faina was able to get free and regain his composure rather well before he spoke calmly, although still a little red in the face. "I can't say for certain, Princess, but you are safe for now. The sooner we get you to the capital, the better," he said, lying to her. He thought it best not to tell the princess all of the details for now. It would be better to wait and see what the daemon had to say. But that said and done, Faina was able to get the caravan ready to travel in a short space of time, and lead them through the remaining desert to the capital city of the Land of Wind. Thankfully no more attacks had come. The sun was getting low now, and everyone was exhausted. If Faina didn't know any better, it would be the perfect time to launch another attack. Thankfully one never came, and instead the faint glow from the lights of the capital came into view as they crossed the last large sand dune. "Look, it's the capital," someone shouted, alerting everyone in the princess's caravan of the sight. Faina could feel everyone's spirits lift knowing they were so close to their destination and out of harm's way. The city was rather large, and sat atop a large lagoon that didn't fit its location in the middle of the desert. Green palm trees surrounded the city, giving it a much better appearance than the surrounding desert. Faina had only ever been to the capital city of the Land of Water before, and a few other large towns of other nations. This had to be the largest city he had set his eyes on in this world so far. However, Faina couldn't help wonder how many dangers lurked inside. Faina led the princess to the capital's gates that were guarded by non-shinobi. Faina presents the documents and paperwork for them to enter the city with such a large amount of people. The whole process didn't take too long, and they were soon welcomed inside and met by an advisor of the daemon himself. The advisor greeted the princess and led all of them to a large apartment complex where they would be staying while in the capital. The princess wasn't impressed but accepted it nevertheless. I do hope you will find everything to your liking, Princess Mizuko. The advisor said, rubbing his stubby little hands together. The princess nodded. Yes, this will do. Please tell the daemon of my arrival and that I will see him right away, she said, not even waiting for the advisor to respond. The advisor nodded and bowed as she walked away. Looking to Faina, he gave a smile. Please give the princess my regards. Faina nodded and watched as he walked away into the broad streets of the city. Once gone, Faina turned to the others, gaining their attention. Hatsu, I want a report of how many shinobi are within our location. Ozawa and Sawano stay with the princess at all times, he said, looking at them. Kaga, you're with me, he said, turning his back to the others, no waiting for their reply. Faina used his body flicker to move quickly to the top of the apartment complex that the princess would be staying. The entire top floor had been reserved for the princess and her party, with guards placed at the entrance of the building. Faina was pretty sure the guards were only there to keep tabs on the princess, reporting anything to their commanders. From his position on top of the building, Faina could see out across the entire city. It was bursting with life and noise, a true oasis. People littered the streets as they drank and partied without a care in the world. It was very different from how a ninja village looked. In some ways, it reminded him of how cities in the real world looked, just not quite as modern. Kaga joined Faina on the rooftop and noted his impressive speed. What's on your mind, Captain? Kaga asked. Faina didn't turn to look at him as he took in the stimulating sight of the city, taking him back to his carefree life in the real world. Captain? Kaga asked again. Faina snapped out of his daze and turned to Kaga. Sorry, I was just lost in thought, he said with a smile. Kaga nodded and remained silent, waiting for Faina to speak. I have a mission for you, Faina said, turning to look over the city once more. Yes, sir. Kaga said, not even asking what it was. I need you to inspect and survey the meeting area where the princess will sit with the daemon tomorrow. Kaga nodded. You think it could be a trap? He asked. I'm not sure, Faina said, crossing his arms over his chest. Make sure you go unseen, he added. Dismissing Kaga, who vanished to carry out his mission. Faina took one last look over the city before also disappearing into the darkness. Inside, the princess had unpacked most of her belongings, or rather her servants had done so, while she told them where to put everything. Ozawa remained quiet, sipping on her water every now and again, while Sawano was helping do some of the heavy lifting, as the princess barked orders. Faina slipped into the room quietly and stood next to Hatsu, who was the only one to notice his arrival. Did you find anything, Hatsu? Faina asked quietly. Hatsu shook his head. No, Captain. I have detected no threats within the city. Whoever those Anbu were, they aren't here. Faina nodded. Keep me updated if anything changes, he said. The princess noticed Faina standing next to Hatsu and shouted over to him, as the room was rather large. Captain Yuki. The princess shouted, running over to him. Where have you been? And why are you sneaking around? Have you heard from the daemon yet? Why would he contact you over me? That makes no sense, she said all at once, suddenly talking to herself. Faina smiled awkwardly. Everything is fine, princess. You have been scheduled for a reception tomorrow morning, he said. The princess didn't answer him and instead shouted at Sawano, who put a large face in the corner of the room. What do you think you are doing? That doesn't belong there, she shouted, running over to him. Faina slipped back next to Hatsu while she was distracted. I want a guard to tail around the princess 24/7, Faina said before vanishing. Hatsu giving a small nod, agreeing. It was early into the morning now, and Faina had remained on the roof of the building until Kaga reported back. His report was all clear, saying that there were no traps that had been set. Faina trusted his report but would check one last time before the meeting to make sure it was safe. After keeping watch almost all night, Faina was finally able to get some rest, letting Sawano take over his watch on the perimeter. The morning of the meeting soon came. The princess was up and dressed in only her finest clothes, as she prepared for her meeting with the daemon. Faina had already briefed his team about the details of the day. They escorted the princess to the office of the daemon, with nothing seeming out of the ordinary. The princess and her most trusted attendants walked through the streets, Faina and his team covering her as her bodyguards. Civilians littered the streets to see what all of the commotion was about. Thankful the city guards were helping keep the crowds under control, and it made the escort of the princess much easier. They arrived at the daemon's palace and were greeted by the daemon's head of security, along with the advisor they had met the night before. Greetings, Princess Mizuko. I trust you slept well, the stubby little advisor said. Fine, thank you, the princess replied, looking down at him. The head of security nodded at Hatsu, who nodded back. I am Captain Dulark of the daemon's guard. If you will follow me, please, the large man said. The princess followed the guard captain along with her servants, Faina and his team keeping close to her as they entered the palace. I'm afraid I must inform you that only the princess and her aides will be permitted entry into the daemon's chambers, Dulark said, speaking to Hatsu. I'm afraid where the princess goes we must go too, Hatsu said. I'm afraid they are the rules. No shinobi are permitted to be in the same room as His Eminence, Dulark said, not backing down. Hatsu was about to protest, but Fina stopped him. That is understandable. I trust you will be safe under your watch. He said, allowing his aura to flare just a little, causing a chill to run down Dulok's spine. Why yes. You have my word that no harm will befall the princess. He said, feeling a little uneasy at the way Fina had just looked at him. Don't worry, Captain Yuki. Nothing will happen to me here. The daemon and my father go way back. The princess said, not seeming worried in the slightest. They soon arrived at a set of rather large doors that had 2 guards stationed at them. They instantly came to attention at the arrival of their commander and the others. Please allow me to escort you inside, Princess, Dulok said, as he nodded for the guards to open the large doors. The princess nodded. How kind of you, she said before turning to Fina. Don't worry, Captain Yuki. I wouldn't be too long, she said, giving him a wink. Fina nodded while he and the others all had to wait outside under close surveillance by the palace guards. It was understandable. No daemon would want shinobi from a foreign nation to be in the same room with them. It came with many risks. Fina was sure the princess would be safe. After all, he had already swept the room for any traps in the early hours of the morning. If the daemon wanted to harm her, he wouldn't do it here. Time passed relatively slow as Fina and his team waited for the princess to finish her meeting with the daemon. They had been taken to a waiting room and served some tea. Fina expected that they would be chatting for a while, mostly boring subjects he was sure. Hatsu was also getting impatient, and Ozawa had fallen asleep on one of the comfy chairs in the room. Fina had allowed Kaga and Sano to head into the city, so they could scope out the surroundings, making sure nothing was happening while their attention was focused on the palace. They also had the job of preparing the princess' caravan for travel, once she was done with the meeting. After a few hours, the princess had finally finished in her negotiations with the daemon. The doors opened and she walked out with her servants. Fina and his team were all present and bowed as she came closer. Evening, Princess, I hope your reception went well, Fina said. The princess smiled. You could say that, it's always the same with politicians. They just chatter on, in love with the sound of their own voice. Fina nodded and turned to escort the princess out of the palace. My orders are to escort you back to the land of water without delay, Princess. I have already prepared your transport and all of your belongings for the apartment complex, Fina said. The princess nodded. Very good, I'm rather tired now, so I shall retire to my carriage, she said, smiling at him. Once outside of the palace, the princess bid farewell to the advisor of the daemon and captain of his guard, who had also escorted them to the exit. The princess was then helped into her carriage by Sano and joined by Ozawa, who would stay by her side just like the journey to the capital. Fina gave the order, and the princess's caravan started to head out, leaving the city behind, as they made their way back into the desert. It was mid-afternoon now, the sun still high in the sky, and the caravan was making good progress. So far, Fina and his team had not detected anything out of the ordinary. The only thing they had come into contact with was a group of civilians traveling to the capital themselves. Hatsu had the lead once again, using his sensory abilities to assess for threats. Ozawa was with the princess inside of her carriage, keeping a close eye on her. Kaga had the port side, and Sano had the starboard, once again chatting to some of the female maids to pass the time. Fina had the rear so he could keep an eye on everything. The princess had told him that she had spoken to the daemon about the assassins from the hidden sand, which he had declared he knew nothing about. He had warned that his relationship with the current Kazakage was tenuous at best, given the current circumstances and times. He had given his word that he had nothing to do with it, and if anything else happened, he would not stand by the Kazakage in trying to start a war with the Land of Water. Fina wouldn't feel safe until they were out of the Land of Wind. Even if the daemon had granted them safe passage, the Kazakaga could still act independently and send another kill squad after them. He would have to remain alert until they were out of the Land of Wind. Even then it wasn't a guarantee they would be safe. Captain Yuki, Hatsu shouted, quickly gaining his attention. Fina dashed to the front, arriving next to him in the blink of an eye. What is it, Hatsu? He asked, sensing the panic in his voice. Hatsu was frozen with fear. The entire caravan halted due to his lead stopping, everyone wondering what was going on. Hatsu gulped before speaking and pointed into the distance. Take a look, Captain, he said. Fina looked into the distance, the sun glinting in his eyes, making it hard to see. He used his hand to help block out the sun, able to make out who stood before them. It can be, that's the Kazakage. That's the Kazakage, Hatsu shouted, alerting the others around him. In the distance about 200 meters or so stood the fourth Kazakage. He wasn't alone either, backed up with a squad of 4 Anbu. What in the blazes is the fourth Kazakage doing here? Hatsu shouted, clearly on guard. Fina was also on edge. He could think of only one reason that the Kazakage would be here. The princess, he said under his breath. Sano and Kaga had also joined Fina and Hatsu at the front. Captain, what do we do? Kaga asked, trying not to seem panicked. Why have we stopped? The princess shouted from further back, clearly outraged. Fina took a moment to think of a plan, but he was interrupted as the Kazakage spoke. I am here for the princess. Give her to me, and you may live, he shouted. He was now only 50 meters away and getting closer by the second. Fina didn't have any choice, and decided to step forwards to meet the Kazakage head-on. He turned to Hatsu just before stepping forth. Hatsu, on my signal, get the princess out of here as fast as you can. They don't want the others, Kaga, tell them to run back to the capital city for shelter. It is their only option. Hatsu nodded, knowing there was no way they could take the Kazekage head-on. Fina stepped forth and started walking to meet the Kazekage and his team on Anbu. He got 20 meters away before one of the Anbu shouted over. That's close enough. Fina stopped, giving a slight bow to the Kazekage before speaking. Lord Kazekage. My name is Fina Yuki of the Hidden Mist. We are under the impression that our feudal lords have come to a peace arrangement. This is your last chance. Hand over the princess or die. The Kazekage shouted, clearly not in the mood to chat. I can't do that, Fina said, placing his hand behind his back, giving Hatsu the signal. Then die. The Kazekage roared as he suddenly raised his hands. Fina didn't have time to react as a tremendous amount of gold dust sprang from the ground, wrapping itself around and encasing him, leaving him unable to move. The Kazekage didn't even give Fina any last words as he clenched his hand, the gold dust tightening its grip around him, crushing his body in an instant. Hatsu and the others watched in horror as the Kazekage's gold dust crushed their captain. Hatsu only took a second before he turned around to bark orders. Everyone run. Run back to the capital. He shouted, causing sudden panic to set in among the princess's caravan. Ozawa, get the princess out of here. Kaga, Sawano, we have to hold them off as long as possible. Hatsu shouted. Kaga and Sawano both nodded while Ozawa grabbed the princess. Forgive me for this, princess, she said as she picked her up and dashed off with her over her shoulder as quickly as possible. The princess had also watched what had happened to Fina. Frozen and unable to speak as she was suddenly whipped up over Ozawa's shoulder. Stop her. The Kazekage snapped to his Anbu, waving his arm at them. The Anbu team didn't waste any time, and quickly raced after Ozawa and the princess. Hatsu, Kaga and Sawano jumped to intercept them as quickly as they could, clashing blades with them midair. But one of the Anbu slipped right past them as they were unable to stop them. Blast it. Hatsu shouted as he was unable to stop the hidden sand Anbu, who was heading after Ozawa and the princess. He and the others had their hands full now, as the sand Anbu wore the same skill as them. The Kazekage stood with his arms crossed, watching the battle between his Anbu and the others unfold. He seemed confident in his men's ability to handle themselves, but decided he didn't want to waste any more time. He raised his arm and started to mold the gold dust that lifted from the sand, preparing it to attack at his command. The Kazekage felt a slight shift in the air and decided to trust his instincts, pulling the gold dust back to shield him. Not a second later, 5 bone bullets hit the shield, almost burrowing their way through before they dropped to the ground next to the Kazekage. He looked in astonishment to whom his assailant was. To his surprise, Fina had pulled himself out of the sand where he had been tossed unharmed. You were supposed to be dead, the Kazekage said in bewilderment. Fina completely pulled himself out of the sand, dusting himself off as he did. He had been able to reinforce his entire body with an underlayer of bone that protected him from being crushed by the gold dust. I don't know how you are still alive, but you won't be for much longer, the Kazekage said as he whirled his gold dust to attack. A barrage of gold dust assaulted Fina. Quickly he flipped and dodged out of the way, jumping and twirling as fast as he could to avoid its grasp. Fina wasn't so slow either that he couldn't counterattack, firing off round after round of bone bullets, this time enhanced with lightning-style chakra, hoping to pierce the Kazekage's defenses. The bone bullets were blocked by the Kazekage, his gold dust defense seemed almost impenetrable. However, the lightning-style enhanced bone bullets were enough to break through the dense gold dust, catching the Kazekage by surprise, forcing him to fight on the defensive. The Kazekage realized quickly and was able to dodge the bone bullets, before hastily slapping his hands onto the ground, causing a colossal wave of gold dust to rise suddenly. It was so thick that even with the lightning enhancement, the bone bullets could not penetrate it, and Fina stood by helplessly. Gold dust tsunami. The Kazekage shouted as the wave traveled towards Fina, giving him no means of escape. The wave of gold dust heading for Fina was massive. Too big to try and get around, leaving him with only one option. Fina quickly made the hand signs and jumped back into an ice mirror he had created. The Kazekage watched as his wave of gold dust crashed down, trapping anything it made contact with, confident that he had buried Fina under it. End of the, he started to say before he was cut off. Fina dashed out of his ice mirror that had formed not far behind the Kazekage, attempting to slash his neck, going for the kill with a bone blade. But the Kazekage flipped back out of the way, gold dust rushed at Fina from both sides, giving him no means of escape, catching his left arm and right leg in his grasp. Fina tried to pull free, but its grip was too great. The Kazekage clenched his fists once again, intent on crushing Fina's arm and leg, leaving him helpless before he intended to finish him off. Fina had already prepared for this and encased his entire body in a membrane of bone, virtually rendering him indestructible. The gold dust tightened around Fina's arm and leg, and he decided it would be best to play along, screaming. Quickly he made a few hand signs with his free hand. The Kazekage, however, noticed the hand signs and leapt into action. Hand signs with just one hand. He shouted as his gold dust created a full barricade around him, stopping the sudden ice spikes that attempted to impale him from above. Fainar used the sudden confusion to pull free of the gold dust, and flipped backward with superb skill to create some well-needed distance, leaving the Kazuki surprised as his gold dust crushed the ice spikes and circled around him. Are you some kind of monster? The Kazuki asked, confused as to how Fainar had survived being crushed not once but twice. Fainar was in a low stance, and his senses were working overtime as he tried to come up with a plan of action. Let's see how you handle this. The Kazuki shouted, as gold dust suddenly burst into the air, creating hundreds of razor-sharp needles. Gold dust, scattered showers. Fainar reacted sharply, forming hand signs at a rapid rate. Ice style, dancing blades jutsu. Fainar shouted as 3 large blades of ice formed around him. Fainar dashed, moving as fast as he could heading towards the Kazuki and into the storm of gold dust needles. His only chance was to force the Kazuki to fight head-on where he held the advantage. The gold spikes rain held down upon Fainar, his ice swords working overtime as they danced around his body, deflecting storm after storm of the never-ending attack. The Kazuki was outraged that Fainar was able to counter his attack, and he knew exactly what he was trying to do. Don't think it will be that easy, he shouted. Gold dust smashed down into the ground as the Kazuki attempted to crush Fainar with it. Fainar was quickly able to dodge and flip, avoiding the large quantities that tried to halt his movement, while his ice swords continued to deflect any and all projectiles that came his way. Fainar was extremely agile, flipping and moving with expert skills to avoid the Kazuki's attacks, slowly getting closer and closer. Digital shrapnel. Fainar shouted, firing his bone bullets in an attempt to counterattack. The Kazuki jumped high into the air avoiding Fainar's attack, and landed on a pile of his gold dust that hovered in the air. You insolent brat. The Kazuki shouted as he crossed his arms over his chest. To his surprise, ice mirrors started to form all around him, Fainar reflection appearing in all of them. What is this? The Kazuki said as he created several rings of gold dust around his body, each spinning violently. Ice style, crystal ice mirrors, Fainar said, the words echoing around the dome. The Kazuki stood atop his gold dust platform, hovering in the air. He had already noted that he was trapped inside this jutsu, and with it being in the air, there was no escape. You were waiting for me to take to the air, he said, impressed. Fainar didn't answer, keeping in the safety of his crystal ice mirrors as he watched the Kazuki, trying to anticipate his next move. The Kazuki had been right, Fainar had been waiting for him to take to the air. He already knew his fighting style would be similar to his son's gear. Fainar had determined that if he could trap him in the air away from the sand, that would be his best chance of defeating him. Meanwhile Hatsu, Kaga and Saano were locked in fierce combat with the hidden sand ambu. Each of them wore the demon masks of sands, and each of them was strong within their own right. Kaga had been pressed on the defensive by the sand ambu he was fighting. They were an equal size and speed, making it an even match. The sand ambu was using a black ninjato sword to fight. His skill with the weapon was impressive, to say the least. Kaga ducked under one slash and parried another with his kunai, before being forced to block another strike. The two locked blades face to face before Kaga hand planted, spinning quickly delivering a heel kick. The sand ambu was able to avoid the attack, and the two took a moment to study the other before making another move. Kaga reached his hand into his weapons pouch on his hip, pulling out his scroll. Using his thumb, he unclipped the seal and pulled it open, creating a poof of white smoke, before a large sword appeared. Taking the blade in his hand, Kaga leapt into action, slicing down at the sand ambu's head as hard as he could. The ambu sidestepped the attack, and the sudden exchange of blows began as sparks flew off the blades as they clashed. Hatsu was also having his fair share of trouble in dealing with his opponent. If he wasn't mistaken, it was the female ambu who had escaped them the last time. Clearly, she had returned back to report her mission of failure, bringing more reinforcements along with the Kazuki himself. She was quick, not wasting any time in attacking Hatsu with everything she had. Hatsu blocked her kick with his forearm, striking back with a punch that she slapped away before spinning, shooting with a crescent kick. Hatsu ducked under the kick, planting his own front kick into her chest, sending her flying back and crashing into the sand. Now you're mine, Hatsu shouted as he quickly made a few hand signs. Fire style, fireball jutsu, he said, letting the large ball of fire loose from his mouth. The female ambu performed a kip up with great skill before flipping over the fireball that was headed right for her. She sailed through the air gracefully, and threw a barrage of shuriken and kunai at Hatsu, which he was able to deflect with his own kunai. Or so he thought. The sand ambu pulled her hands through the air, her fingers spread wide as if she was pulling on strings. Hatsu noticed too late that she was, in fact, pulling on chakra threads that were connected to the kunai and shuriken she had thrown at him. All of the projectiles suddenly launched at him from every angle, each sinking into his body, riddling him full of razor-sharp edges. Saano was trapped in a test of strength with his opponent, who was a large man with bigger arms than Saano. Both of them had their fingers interlocked, each trying to overpower the other. Give up, little man, the hidden sand ambu said as he gained the advantage, pushing Saano down to his knee. Never, Saano shouted through gritted teeth. Pulling back, Saano planted his foot into his opponent's body and rolled backward, flipping him over with a sacrifice throw that sent him flying into the air. The sand ambu flipped in the air and landed on his feet, tossing several kunai at Saano as he did to distract him. Sawano ducked under the kunai, landing in a press-up position before jumping back to his feet. He noticed that the sand ninja was making hand signs, and he didn't like the look of them. Wind style, vacuum bullets. The Anbu shouted before taking a deep breath, and then exhaling several small blasts of wind chakra. They hit their mark, and Sawano was blasted back, hitting the ground hard, his flak jacket being torn to shreds. He hit the ground hard, looking at his body to try and assess the damage. "That's gonna leave a bruise or two," he said with a groan. He quickly rolled to the side, his eyes almost popping out of his skull as the sand Anbu landed, plunging his sword into the sand where Sawano had just been. The sand Anbu turned, quick for his size, slashing down, again and again, trying to cut Sawano in half. Sawano was doing his best to avoid and deflect the sand Anbu's attack. Dodging, he rolled back before he blocked a downward strike with his kunai. The weight of the sand Anbu's attack was heavy, and forced Sawano's hand into his shoulder, as he tried with all his might to push the attack away. "Time to die," the sand Anbu said as wind-style chakra suddenly enveloped his blade. Sawano's face bursting with the realization that he was in serious trouble. The wind-style chakra blade cut straight through Sawano and his kunai with ease, Sawano's blood scattering on the hot sand beneath them, as he fell to the ground devoid of life. The Kazakage was trapped within Fina's crystallized mirror's jutsu, his rings of gold dust still spinning around him, ready to defend from any incoming attacks. Fina didn't want to waste any time talking, and decided his best bet was to attack at full force. He zoomed from mirror to mirror at such speed he wasn't even visible, each time firing a round of bone bullets, enhanced by lightning-style chakra. The Kazakage had compressed his gold dust, so that it was hard enough to defend against the lightning-enhanced bone bullets, each of them smashing into the gold dust with an explosive thud. The Kazakage was doing well to defend against the onslaught of attacks coming from Fina, who appeared to be almost teleporting from mirror to mirror. But the Kazakage was soon forced into a full defensive posture, and pulled his gold dust to cover his entire body in a sphere. Fina stopped attacking for the time being, wondering what he was planning. "If my lightning style wouldn't work, then maybe ice style," Fina shouted as he appeared on top of the gold dust sphere, stabbing a giant bone blade he had created from fusing multiple bones together, until they took the shape of a sizable twisted lance head. The bone blade struck the gold dust, piercing it about halfway through. Fina wasn't trying to break the defense. Instead, he had infused his ice release into his bone blade, allowing it to freeze almost anything it struck. The gold dust reacted on defense, and spikes rose up trying to impale Fina. However, before they could reach him, the gold dust froze as the ice began to surround the entire sphere. Inside the gold dust sphere, the Kazakage was focusing all of his chakra to keep the defense up against Fina's lightning style. Suddenly he could feel a chill all around him as his gold dust started to freeze, the ice slowly making its way to his feet. He became enraged that he was being put on his toes by Fina, and decided it was time to get serious. "Don't underestimate the Kazakage," he shouted as dark circles appeared around his eyes. A humongous amount of gold dust suddenly burst through Fina's crystallized mirrors, shattering them under the weight. Fina was quickly forced on the defensive as he tried to jump away, but was swarmed on all sides, making escape next to impossible, and the gold dust wrapped itself around Fina, trapping him and squeezing tightly. "You have been a thorn in my side long enough, boy. This time you won't escape," the Kazakage said as he clapped his palms together. "I'm going to bury you under this desert for eternity," he shouted, letting his chakra explode. The gold dust started pulling Fina down into the sand at a steady pace. His entire body was trapped apart from his face, helpless to do anything other than watch as the Kazakage smirked in triumph. Fina's problem wasn't being crushed to death. Thanks to his bones being reinforced, he didn't have to worry about that. His concern was now his air supply. "This is your end," the Kazakage said just before Fina took a large breath, his face descending into the hot sand. Fina was starting to panic now. He continued to sink lower and lower into the sand, as the gold dust pulled him down. The weight was starting to get more intense, and if not for his KekkaiGenkai, he would have been crushed already. "What do I do?" he thought to himself. Panic setting in now as he was running out of ideas. "Calm yourself, Fina," Seiken's voice suddenly said. Fina closed his eyes to the darkness of the underground, entering his inner psychic, coming face to face with Seiken. "Fina, you must remain calm and try not to panic," Seiken said. Fina waved his arms in the air. "How am I supposed to remain calm when I have been buried alive?" he shouted, still panicking. He turned to Seiken with a desperate look on his face. "We have to enter Tailed Beast's state. It's the only way to free us from this pressure," Fina said, thinking about it hard. Seiken shook his large head. "You know we can't do that yet. We still need more practice," the Six Tails said. Fina objected but was suddenly pulled out of his inner psychic as his air supply took a severe dive. "I'm almost out of air, my lungs are burning," how he thought to himself as his world slowly turned even darker than it already was. His memories started to flash over in his mind. Memories of his previous life in the real world, how he was shot and killed, being reborn into this world. "I don't want to die again." Fina felt a sudden burst of life as he repeated the words, his conviction to life becoming stronger. "I won't die here." Fina started to concentrate hard, allowing his chakra to spill out all around his body. He had to focus extremely hard, allowing every chakra point to dispel chakra at the same time, managing to form a small layer of ice around his entire body, freezing the gold dust around him, giving him just enough room to make a few hand signs. I will let this be the end summoning jutsu. Fina shouted as he slapped his bleeding hand onto the small layer of ice. The Kazakage stood with an assertive, victorious posture. Having watched Fina sink into the sand below, trapping him under the weight of the desert, he was confident he was rid of him for good. The Kazakage could feel the sand beneath his feet start to shift. The vibrations started to get stronger and stronger, until the Kazakage felt the sand suddenly burst beneath him, forcing him to jump high into the air to avoid what followed. Erg, a huge white yeti, roared as it burst from the sand, its breath freezing anything it touched. The yeti landed hard, causing the sand beneath it to cascade before it settled back down, giving another mighty roar, focusing its gaze on the Kazakage. What on earth is that thing? The Kazakage said, not believing his eyes as he noticed Fina stood on top of his head. Good job, Fire. Fina said to the large yeti. Looks like you're in a tough spot with this one. I will do what I can to aid you. Fire shouted as he leapt into attack. The Kazakage took a breath before allowing his gold dust to explode all around him. You insolent brat. I thought I already told you. Don't underestimate the Kazakage. He shouted as gold dust erupted in such a humongous wave that it towered over Fire. Here we go. Fire shouted as he roared, using his icy breath to freeze the gold dust, before crashing his fist through it, sending chunks of ice smashing into the ground. Wave after wave of gold dust attacked as Fire continued to freeze and smash it. The Kazakage was flying in the air on his gold dust glider, using all of his focus to try and surround Fire with it, all while dodging in and out of the rain of icicles. Fire jumped into the air, spinning rapidly as he did, shooting large icicles in every direction, freezing anything they came into contact with. Yet, more gold dust took his place as Fire continued to battle wave after wave again. It's never ending. Fire shouted as he smashed yet another frozen wave of gold dust with his massive fist. You need to distract him. Break his concentration so I can get close to him. Fire shouted. Gold dust wrapped around his neck and his arm as it tried to pull him to the ground. I'm on it. Fina shouted as he started to form hand signs as fast as possible. Get to it then. Fire shouted as he used his ice breath to freeze the gold dust wrapped around his arm, breaking it, and then doing the same to the gold dust around his neck, before tackling yet another wave. The Kazakage was using all of his strength, gliding around in the air as he avoided huge chunks of frozen gold dust one after the other, as he continued to attack with all of his might. I am the Yondaime Kazakage. The likes of you will not defeat me. He roared, raising his hands up, drawing as much gold dust as he could gather. The gold dust responded to the Kazakage's command, as it continued to rise and rise, until it towered so high that it made Fire look small. This is it. You're finished. Teach Kazakage shouted as he clasped his hands together before pulling them apart as if they were stuck together, molding the gold dust with his chakra. The massive tower of gold dust suddenly started to rain down hellfire, as huge missiles of reinforced gold dust fired in a volley so vast that it blocked the sun out. Not good. Fire shouted as he attempted to avoid as many gold dust missiles as he could, but there were just too many, and the unrelenting barrage quickly blasted him into the ground. At the last second, Fire grabbed Fina and tossed him high above the storm of gold dust. I have done all I can, the rest is up to you, Fina, Fire said before vanishing in a large poof of white smoke. Fina had finished his hand signs while still flying through the air. He formed an ice mirror and slipped into it, looking back just before he did. Thank you, Fire, Fina said, disappearing into the ice mirror. Quickly he slipped out of another ice mirror and flew through the air with tremendous speed, headed right for the Kazakage. Eat this. Fina shouted as he let the bones in his arm form a massive lance head, infusing it with lightning-style chakra. The Kazakage had been so busy attacking the massive yeti with all of his might that he had failed to notice Fina take his blind spot. When did he? He said under his breath as he tried to bring gold dust around his body to form a defensive barrier. At the absolute last second, the Kazakage was able to fire a spear of gold dust that hit Fina in his stomach, causing him to alter his trajectory by just an inch. His bone landed scraping the Kazakage's left arm, knocking him off his gold dust glider into the air. Fina and the Kazakage both fell through the air at high speed. Fina had taken a fair bit of damage from the gold dust spear, as it had managed to break through his bone defense and hit one of his vital organs. The Kazakage had also taken damage from Fina's attack. His left arm had been cut, leaving a deep wound, and thanks to the lightning-style half of his body was currently paralyzed, causing him to freefall alongside Fina. Still, the Kazakage was able to break his fall with a blanket of gold dust before he hit the desert sand below. Fina, on the other hand, had not been so lucky and hit the ground at full speed, crashing hard into the sand below. The Kazakage sat up slowly, holding his left arm with his right hand, trying to stop the bleeding. His gold dust mountain had fallen crashing to the ground, harmlessly in the background. He concentrated hard, using a small mount to wrap around the gash on his arm, squeezing firmly, stopping the bleeding like a tourniquet. He winced before looking over to Fina, who was starting to pull himself out of the small crater he had created in the sand from his impact. His bones may have been harder than steel, but his insides were not, and the impact from the ground had done damage, not to mention the internal bleeding he was suffering from. Faina dragged himself out of the crater, coughing up blood onto the sand as he did. Looking over to the Kazukiichi, who was examining him intently. "Why don't you give up? Why would you just die?" he said as he extended his right arm shakily, his body still a little numb from the lightning style. Dull dust started to creep along the sand, making its way over to Faina, slowly covering his body, wrapping him up once again, ready to crush him. "Looks like you're out of tricks this time," the Kazukiichi said, forcing himself to stand, shaking the effects of Faina's attack off with sheer willpower. Faina had nothing left now. He was using all of his remaining chakra to try and stop the internal bleeding, as well as keep his bones reinforced, so that the gold dust didn't crush him. Closing his eyes, he used the last of his energy to enter his inner psyche. "I don't think I have the strength left to keep fighting," Faina said, lying on his back in the soft snow that covered the ground in his inner world. He was looking up into the sky, the glow of the moon bringing him some comfort. "You think you can lend me a hand, Seiken?" he said, looking over to the Six Tails who was sat next to him. "We are one, Faina. My powers are at your disposal," the Six Tails said softly as he watched Faina's eyes start to close. "Good, I think I'll tag you in for this round," Faina said before falling unconscious. Seiken nodded as he picked Faina up with one of his tails, placing his body inside the center of his stomach. "Time for you to rest, Faina, I will take it from here." Kaga was engaged in a battle of blades with his opponent, each of them well versed in the art of Kenjutsu. The two of them equally matched, their skulls appearing almost identical as the battle was quickly becoming a chess match. Kaga blocked a barrage of attacks before countering with his own. Swiping with his large blade, he knocked the sand ambu across the sand with the weight of his swing. The sand ambu swiftly flicked back as he dodged a thrust attack by Kaga, and then blocked a downward strike aimed at his head, his black ninja holding well, under the weight of Kaga's large blade. The two of them locked blades as they pressed all of their weight into each other, coming face to face. "You can't win," Sand Ambu said, before pushing Kaga's blade to the side, trying to take his neck with a quick thrust. Kaga ducked under the blade, time slowing down as the tip of it just missed his nose. Kaga had overextended his lower back and fell to the floor, the Sand Ambu taking full advantage as he slashed and thrust his blade down, trying to wound him. Kaga blocked every attack while still on his back, scuffling to his feet before jumping high into the air to avoid another slash at his midsection. "This guy is fast," he thought to himself as he landed, gaining a fair amount of distance. The Sand Ambu twirled his blade with expert skill, and flicked it down towards the ground before pointing it at Kaga. "I will take pleasure in serving your head from your body," the Ambu said. Kaga smirked and placed his large blade on his shoulder, and extended his free hand, flicking his fingers into his palm twice. "Bring it on." The two of them charged at one another, clashing blades once again, each trying their best to deliver the decisive blow. Neither of them giving or gaining ground as their swords moved so fast they became blur. Kaga blocked another thrust from the Sand Ambu, and countered with a slash to his midsection, but he dodged the attack by jumping off the ground, and thrust his blade down at blinding speed. Kaga only just dodged the attack, the Sand Ambu's blade slicing Kaga's cheek, just missing his eye. Kaga gripped the back of the blade with his hand, before slamming the black ninja into the ground with his own sword, in an attempt to disarm his opponent. The Sand Ambu was quick to counter as he jumped into the air, slamming his left foot into his face with a roundhouse kick, knocking Kaga flying as he rolled like a rag doll onto the ground before slapping on his back. The Sand Ambu pulled his blade from the ground before twirling it around his back with expert skill, and tossed the sword changing hands before he flipped through the air, slashing down at Kaga with a powerful blow. Kaga had only just gotten back up onto one knee, and was able to avoid the attack. The Sand Ambu didn't stop there as he brought the blade back, slashing at Kaga's head, who flipped back, performing a back handspring to dodge. Kaga was starting to be pushed on the defensive as he blocked another attack on his back foot, losing more and more ground to the Sand Ambu. Jumping high into the air, flipping backwards, Kaga landed on a large rock, trying to gain the advantage with the high ground. However, the Sand Ambu sliced through the boulder with a mighty swing of his blade, causing the boulder to shatter, Kaga flipping over the Ambu, as the two locked eyes in an intense stare-off. "I've had enough of you," Kaga shouted before charging at the Sand Ambu. Kaga jumped into the air, flipping in a 360 spin, before bringing all of his weight down into his blade, trying to slice the Ambu in half. The two swords clashed, and the weight of Kaga's attack was enough to push the Ambu into the ground, flinging up debris into the air around them. The Sand Ambu pushed Kaga off of him to try and clear some ground, yet Kaga quickly rushed back in for more, trying to press on the attack, engaging in another brutal exchange of attacks. This time Kaga pressed forwards, gaining the advantage as he used his larger sword's weight to his advantage, each blow pushing the Sand Ambu back on the defense. Kaga blocked a counter-attack and sliced down, over-committing to the swipe, leaving himself open, as the Ambu delivered a jumping, spinning back kick to his face, knocking him back before he tried another quick thrust attack. Kaga was somehow able to block the attack, even as the blood from his nose blinded him. He pushed the Sand Ambu back before charging at him, once again giving a battle cry. "Arg!" Kaga roared, attacking with all his might. Kaga went high with his attack, and the Anbu ducked under the onslaught, rolling on his hand as he did before ducking under the second attack. This time he kicked out Kaga's leg, sweeping him to the floor. Kaga hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him. The sand Anbu didn't give him any time to rest as he thrust his blade down at his head, Kaga's eyes almost popping out of his skull as he quickly rolled out of the way. Kaga continued to roll along the ground, dodging thrust after thrust until he bounced onto one knee, leaning back as far as he could, just avoiding a slash that was aimed at his head, the blade skimming Kaga's headband, flinging sparks into the air. Kaga countered with a flurry of slashes, and the two of them clashed blades hard, coming face to face again. Both of them breathing heavily now as the battle had dragged out, costing them a lot of stamina. Kaga pushed forwards, pressing his shoulder on the back of his large sword, the sand Anbu doing the same, as the two of them competed for dominance, before both of them jumped backwards, landing in a ready stance. It's time to finish this. They both shouted at the same time, charging towards one another. They clashed blades so fast that they shot past one another. Kaga turned quickly, throwing a handful of kunai at the Anbu, who dodged by jumping high into the air. Kaga threw another set of kunai before jumping into the air, ready to meet the sand Anbu head on. The sand ninja deflected the kunai in mid-air, and dived down, his sword raised, prepared to deliver the final blow. They both shouted as they clashed mid-air, each of them landing with their swords stretched, waiting to see who would fall first. Meanwhile, you did well, boy, but you were no match for the KekkaiGenkai said, as his gold dust had fully encased Fina now, ready to crush him once and for all. Suddenly a bright light from inside started to burst its way through the layers of gold dust until it fully exploded, freeing the monster that now stood before the KekkaiGenkai. Fina's body was now covered in a dark red, nearly black layer of chakra. He had entered version 2 of the tailed beast state, and all 6 tails were visible as he locked his eyes onto the KekkaiGenkai, snarling at him. Agent Cricky, the KekkaiGenkai said, confused, as he stared at the beast before him. You really are a monster. The KekkaiGenkai shouted as he jumped back, landing on a gold dust platform that continued to float into the air. Seiken had taken full control of Fina's body for him while he was unconscious. The fact that Fina was out of it made things much more comfortable for Seiken, as they had never entered version 2 together, and with Fina unconscious, Seiken didn't have to worry about Fina's chakra levels dropping. As entering version 2 required a lot of energy and chakra, but with Fina asleep, Seiken only had to use his own chakra, meaning Fina could rest while Seiken battled for him. A feat not possible while Fina was conscious. The KekkaiGenkai didn't waste much time before he attacked again, using his gold dust to crash down in a massive wave, trying to capture the beast before him. The gold dust crashed into Seiken, and like a massive wave pulled him under, the KekkaiGenkai attempting to trap him before he could counterattack. Suddenly 6 enormous red and black chakra tails burst from the sea of gold dust, and extended at a rapid rate towards the KekkaiGenkai, trying to pierce him. The KekkaiGenkai didn't stick around and zoomed on his gold dust glider, avoiding the attacks of the massive tails. Flying with expert skill as he ducked under one of the tails, he used his gold dust to redirect another, sending it crashing into one of the other tails, before he was forced to jump, spinning in the air to avoid the swipe of another tail. Seiken decided to pull his tails back and burst free from the sea of gold dust, jumping into the air. The KekkaiGenkai watched as the beast leapt towards him, his claws extended ready to take his head off. Using his gold dust to grip Seiken around his waist, he attempted to launch him back towards the ground. But Seiken's body was supple and slipped free of the gold dust. The KekkaiGenkai tried to use more and more to get a hold of him, yet Seiken jumped and darted away, each time getting closer to the KekkaiGenkai until he was within striking range. Take this. The KekkaiGenkai shouted as he unleashed a hellfire storm of gold dust bullets, trying to stop the advance of the 6 tails. Seiken had a different idea and spat out a large blast of corrosive alkali to counter the gold dust, causing it to turn soggy and fall out of the sky before melting. The KekkaiGenkai did well to avoid the first blast of corrosive alkali, but soon noticed the smirk on Seiken's face, before he spat more and more of the acid at him. The KekkaiGenkai was forced to counter with more and more gold dust, the corrosive alkali rendering the gold dust unusable once it made contact, as Seiken continued to fire as much of it as he could. Why you? The KekkaiGenkai shouted as a small speck of the acid landed on his black jacket, forcing him to rip it off before the acid burned through to his skin. He turned to see Seiken had gotten behind him, having moved at amazing speed. The beast took a swipe at the KekkaiGenkai's head, who with a small shield of gold dust, blocked the attack. The force of it, however, knocked him flying through the air, causing him to freefall while being chased by Seiken, who spat more corrosive alkali at him. The KekkaiGenkai flipped and dodged the first blast of acid. He then used a gold dust blanket to block the second burst, but Seiken's form suddenly crashed through the melting blanket of gold dust, smashing the KekkaiGenkai in the ribs with its razor-sharp claws. To Seiken's surprise, the KekkaiGenkai turned to gold dust and the dust wrapped around Seiken's arm, holding his frame in the air, stopping his freefall. Giant gold dust spear. The KekkaiGenkai shouted from behind as he launched his attack, trying to impale Seiken. This time, the KekkaiGenkai was surprised. The 6 tails body suddenly turned a dark purple in color, wrapping itself around the spear as acid leaked out of its body, melting the KekkaiGenkai's attack. Seiken slivered around the melting gold dust before extending its body trying to slash at the cage, this time hitting him with a clean blow, knocking him off his glider, sending him crashing into the desert sand below. Seiken smiled at his handiwork and dropped back down to the ground, allowing his chakra to turn from purple back to red and black, giving a colossal roar shaking the very ground as it landed back onto the ground. Hatsu seemed helpless as the sand anbu he was facing pulled her fingers, manipulating the kunai and shuriken she had thrown, taking him off guard. The barrage of kunai and shuriken all hit their target, as Hatsu's body was riddled with the razor-sharp edges of the blades. "That's the end of you," the female anbu said. Hatsu's body suddenly burst into a small pool of water, the shuriken and kunai falling to the sand clattering against one another. A substitution. When did he? She shouted, outraged she had fallen for the simple jutsu. Hatsu quickly swiped down from behind her, aiming his kunai's blade at the back of her spine. At the last second, she was able to turn and jump out of the way of his attack, her reflexes proving to be too sharp. Hatsu stopped on the spot as he twirled his kunai into a reverse grip in his hand. The female anbu pulling her chakra threads to use her projectiles to attack once more, but to her surprise, nothing happened. "Sorry, but I am already familiar with your chakra threads technique. It won't work on me anymore," Hatsu said with a smile, his filled teeth glistening in the sunlight. "You arrogant fool." The sand anbu shouted as she flicked her arms down, connecting more chakra threads into the sand around Hatsu. "You already played right into my hands," she shouted as she pulled her chakra threads back hard, exposing a large amount of kunai with explosive tags wrapped around them. Hatsu sighed as he lifted his kunai before tossing it into the ground. "I already told you. That wouldn't work on me anymore," he said with a blank expression. Suddenly all of the explosive kunai that the sand anbu was pulling with her threads suddenly changed direction, all of them shooting towards her instead of Hatsu. She was alarmingly startled and had no chance to react, screaming as all of the kunai she had laid out to use as a trap exploded all around her. Hatsu watched as her figure sailed out of the black smoke from the explosion, before it hit the ground with a thud. He walked over to her slowly, regarding all of the damage she had sustained from her attack. Her demon mask had fallen off, leaving her half-scorched face exposed for Hatsu to see. She was breathing heavily. Her body burned and profoundly damaged, yet she still managed to look Hatsu in the eyes with a devilish look. "You won," when she spat, giving a small chuckle. Lord Kazuki's while she was suddenly cut off as a monstrous roar sounded in the far distance, causing Hatsu to turn and look. "What in the blazes was that?" he said, turning to look back at the sand anbu who now lay dead on the ground before him. "Well, I had better give the others a hand." Meanwhile Ozawa was retreating as quick as she possibly could with the princess over her shoulder, who was still kicking and screaming about the whole situation. "How dare those sand ninja do this? My father will hear about it," she said, screaming as Ozawa was forced to jump high into the air to avoid a barrage of shuriken. "Will you stop running so fast?" the sand anbu shouted as he chased after them, waving his hands in the air at Ozawa. Only one sand anbu was currently on their tail, but with no cover to hide, the princess was exposed to too much danger. Ozawa continued to run as fast as she could, doing her best to dodge and deflect the odd shuriken that got too close, the sand anbu seeming to throw them like it was a game at random. Ozawa was starting to get tired now, and the scorching desert sun was making things even worse. She spotted a large ravine in the distance, knowing that it was hers, and the princess' best bet. She darted towards it, the anbu following the two of them, gaining more and more ground as he continued to shout at them. "Princess, I am going to have to put you down and fight this guy. When I do, you need to get out of here as fast as possible and hide." "What? I will do no such. You must. It is your only chance of staying alive," Ozawa shouted, cutting the princess off. The princess sealed her lips as the realization of the situation was finally sinking in. Ozawa jumped onto the start of some large rocks before climbing over to the other side. It was a valley surrounded by two cliffs on either side, a path going in a sort of zigzag line. "Now, princess," Ozawa shouted as she put her down. Deciding this was her best bet, the princess looked Ozawa in the eyes and gave her a nod. "You have to survive," she said to Ozawa. Ozawa returned her nod and placed a kunai in her hand. "Please take this, princess. Just in case." The princess held it tight and nodded as a tear fell from her eye before she turned to run, leaving Ozawa alone to face the anbu that was chancing them. Ozawa watched as the princess ran and ran until she disappeared out of sight. "I will win, princess," she said, her resolve burning in her purple eyes. My, how touching," a voice said from behind her. Ozawa turned on her heel into a defensive stance to face the anbu. He was stood high atop the rocky cliff that Ozawa had climbed over to get into the valley. "Where is the princess?" the anbu asked as he drew his sword from his back. Ozawa clenched her kunai tied at the side of the blade. "You won't touch her," she said before throwing a burst of shuriken at the anbu. The sand anbu easily deflected the shuriken with his blade before twisting it back into a reverse grip, the back of the blade placed against his forearm. "I would like to take my time enjoying you, little girl, but I have a mission to do. Tell me where the princess is and I promise to grant you a," he said, suddenly stopping to think about what he was saying, placing his hand on his chin to think. "Well no, you're getting a slow death either way for making me chase you so far through the fucking desert," he shouted before jumping high into the air. Here we go, he yelled in a crazy tone. Ozawa jumped backwards and avoided the attack, but the Anbu ninja was very fast as he darted towards her, reading his blade to an attack. Time to die, little girl, he shouted. Ozawa blocked his first strike to her throat with her kunai. The sand Anbu spun around his sword, suddenly chancing hands, another attack coming down to the top of her head. Ozawa was able to block the attack, but he was much stronger than she was, and the force of the block knocked her back. Not bad, he said, laughing before jumping in to attack again. Let's see how you deal with this. He was spinning fast and jumping all over the place, as his blade seemed to strike out of nowhere, almost unpredictable. Ozawa blocked the first strike, but was quickly put on her back foot, as she was forced to duck and dive out of the way of his strikes. She soon found her back pressed against one of the large cleft walls. The sand Anbu thrust his blade aiming for her face, but Ozawa was able to avoid it, his blade getting wedged in the rock behind her. Ozawa used a palm strike to hit him in the chest before she slashed with her kunai. The Anbu let the first strike hit his chest, but grabbed her wrist before she could slash him, her attack having no effect. I don't think so, little girl. The only one here who will be putting something inside one of us is me, he said, giving a sickening chuckle from behind his demon mask. Ozawa smiled, and it seemed to confuse him a little. Sorry, but you aren't my type, she shouted as her wrist suddenly turned into water, freeing her from his grasp. Ozawa used his confusion to strike him in the groin with her knee, dropping him to the ground with a large groan of pain. Why, you bitch, he shouted as he tried to get his breath back. Ozawa quickly dashed up the cleft face using her chakra to stick to the wall with her feet, before making some quick hand signs. Fuck you, she shouted as she finished the hand signs, pointing her finger towards him like a gun. Secret Mizuki clan technique. Water gun rapid fire jutsu, Ozawa shouted as bullets of water suddenly started to fire from the tip of her finger. The sand Anbu noticed the jutsu and was about to try and jumped out of the way, when he suddenly noticed his hand had been tied to the handle of his sword, but was stuck in the cliff wall by a piece of ninja wire. When did you? He screamed as he tried to pull his arm free, the wire cutting into his hand, almost taking it clean off. Fuck, he screamed as the storm of water bullets hit him, pumping him full of holes as they tore right through him, hitting the sand below, knocking up a small dust storm. Ozawa finished screaming and stopped firing the water bullets from her finger, before taking in a large breath of fresh air. She jumped down to check that her opponent was dead, and gave what remained of his body a kick. That's what a piece of trash like you deserves, fucking creep, she said as she relaxed her guard. I had better go and find the princess, she said. As soon as she took one step on the ground, the hairs on the back of her neck suddenly stood up, and she felt a blade cut right through her stomach. You shouldn't let your guard down, the voice said as the blade went clean through. Ozawa noticed it was another of the Anbu, and thankfully not the one she had just killed. He must have managed to get past the others and followed us here, she thought as she turned around to get a better look. The sand Anbu was very surprised that his blade had done no damage, and was forced to dodge Ozawa's kunai that almost slit his throat. Dumping back out of the way, he raised his sword and took a low fighting stance. Ozawa also jumped back and took a defensive stance. If not for her hydrification technique, she would have been dead, and she knew it. That's a nice technique you have there, no wonder Palabo over there didn't stand a chance, he said, standing to his full height. Ozawa noticed his size and couldn't help feel intimidated at the sight of his massive frame. You Miss Ninja are full of little tricks, aren't you? He said as he placed his blade back in the sheath on his back. If my sword won't work on you, then maybe ninjutsu will, he said as he started to form hand signs. Ozawa watched as the sand Anbu started to make hand signs, and she decided to counter with her own. Wind style, air bullets. Water style, water pistol. Each of them shouted as they unleashed their jutsu. The wind bullets collided with the water bullets, clashing in the air, giving small shock waves off as they cancelled each other out. Both Ozawa and the hidden sand Anbu jumped back, each landing on a cliff face, before starting to make more hand signs. Try this one. Wind style, great vacuum sphere, he shouted as he unleashed a massive compressed breath of wind style chakra. Ozawa had quickly formed her own hand signs while running along the cliff face, her chakra holding her feet to the wall. Water style, raging waves jutsu, Ozawa shouted as she unleashed a large stream of water from her mouth. Again, both jutsu clashed in the air as the water and wind style jutsus cancelled each other out over and over again. Each of them continued to run along the cliff walls as they continued to fire off jutsu at one another in what seemed like a never-ending battle. However, Ozawa was starting to tire as her hydration levels were running on low, the blazing sun making things worse. The sand Anbu's wind style suddenly broke through Ozawa's water style, and he pressed his advantage. What's the matter, girl? Can't handle the heat, he shouted as he flipped through the air, trying to land a flying kick that would have crushed her against the rocky cliff. Instead, Ozawa was able to jump out of the way, watching as the power of his kick destroyed the cliffside. Ozawa knew she needed to retreat and find some water if she was to stand a chance against this monster. But the sand Anbu had other ideas. As he pulled himself free of the debris, he started to form more hand signs. Don't tell me you're trying to run away already, he shouted as he continued to make the hand signs. Ozawa jumped as fast as she could, running along the cliff sides, trying to gain as much ground as she could away from him. Wind style. Wine dragon bullet. he shouted as the air around him suddenly whipped up into a small tornado before taking the form of a dragon. Ozawa realized too late she was trapped between two cliffs and his wind dragon, having played right into his hands. The wind-style dragon flew towards her as it roared, smashing into her before closing its vast jaws. Ozawa's body was whipped around like a ragdoll, as the wind dragon violently smashed her off the cliffs and rocks, before finally crashing into the ground, exploding in a massive blast as it made contact. Hatsu could hear the sounds of a monstrous battle coming from the distance where he knew Fina to be battling against the Kazekage. Not wanting to waste any more time, he rushed over to find Sawano laying on the ground bleeding badly. Hatsu rushed over to assess the damage, seeing that Sawano was still alive, but barely. "Hold on, Sawano," he shouted as the sounds of blades clashing caught his attention. He turned to see Kaga battling with his opponent before the two of them clashed in midair, landing in a strong stance each with their swords raised. Even Hatsu couldn't tell who had delivered the final blow, and he quickly drew kunai ready to attack if Kaga fell. Kaga and the sand anvil landed strong, none of them moving an inch, each waiting to see who would fall first. Kaga coughed up a little blood and dropped to one knee, using his sword to help keep him upright. The sand anbu turned around and placed his sword over his shoulder, standing tall before speaking. "Good fight," he said as his upper body suddenly dropped to the floor, blood spraying from his legs that stood upright for a moment longer before they too fell to the sand. Hatsu ran over to Kaga, who was slowly picking himself up from the ground, his hand placed over the slash on his midsection. "Ah, Hatsu, looks like you won your battle too," Kaga said, smirking. Hatsu helped pick him up, but let him stand with his own strength. "Sawano is down, looks like his opponent went after Ozawa with the other one," Hatsu said, sounding worried. The sound of another monstrous roar echoed from across the desert, causing Hatsu and Kaga's hairs to stand on end. "Is it the captain?" Kaga asked, his eyes wide. Hatsu nodded as he could feel the immense chakra that was coming from that direction. "Never mind the captain," Hatsu said as he turned around. "You stay here and help Sawano, you're no condition to move around too much anyway," Hatsu said. "What about Captain Yuki? He needs our help. I mean, he's fighting a cage for God's sake," Kaga said, objecting. "No, we would only get in his way," Hatsu said with a sullen glance. "I better try and catch up with the others. You stay here and try to patch Sawano up," Hatsu said as he quickly dashed off across the desert. Kaga nodded and turned as more and more explosions sounded in the distance. The Kazekage had managed to soften the blow of his return to the earth, with a soft sheet of gold dust breaking his foe. From there, he had pulled himself back onto his feet, his chakra was now running low, and his stamina was starting to give out. "You are nothing more than a monster, mere Jinchuriki, you cannot defeat me," he said as he punched his fist into the ground beneath him. Seiken watched as the Kazekage mumbled a few words and punched the ground. The Six Tails was still in full control of Fina's body as he was still unconscious. Seiken had to say he was very impressed by the Kazekage. He had proved he was no mere ninja, and was putting up an extraordinary fight. Suddenly ripples started to form in the ground below as the sand began to break, and waves began to form like an ocean, as gold dust exploded from the desert itself. The Kazekage slapped his hands together and made a few hand signs before finally placing his hands onto the sand. "I already told you not to underestimate the Kazekage. This is my ultimate technique," he screamed at the top of his lungs, clearly enraged. Inside Fina's inner world, he was currently led unconscious atop the soft snow. His eyes abruptly snapped open as he took in his surroundings. "What's going on?" he said, standing to his feet slowly. "Fina, you have finally woken," Seiken said, sounding happy. "What's going on, Seiken? Last I remember I was battling the Kazekage before passing out," Fina said, still a little groggy. "That's correct. I have been using your body to battle against him while you rested," Seiken said. "We don't have long now that you are awake, my control will fade soon, which means we won't be able to maintain version 2, Seiken said, sounding worried. Fina took a moment to take in all of the information. "We are in version 2? He asked, sounding surprised. "I thought we couldn't do that yet," he asked. "That is correct. However, while you were unconscious, I was able to take control over your body, which allowed me to use only my chakra to support the form, leaving no stress on your body." Fina nodded. "Alright, Seiken, how much time do we have left?" Fina asked. "About 20 seconds and it would seem the Kazekage has unleashed his most powerful technique," the Six Tails said, sounding worried. "I fear he is attempting to seal us." Fina let the words sink in before an idea suddenly popped into his head. "That's it," he shouted. "Seiken, I need you to fire a tailed beast bomb as quickly as you can to give me as much space as possible." Fina shouted. "Okay, I'm on it," Seiken shouted, not asking any question. Seiken jumped back, trying to avoid the massive waves of gold dust that were crashing down, each trying to pull him under the vast ocean that had formed. Quickly he ran and slithered as fast as he could between wave after wave, melting any thread of gold dust that came too close to him. Seiken jumped high into the air, and his body suddenly grew large and fast, as if he was full of water, the black and red chakra forming all around his mouth. The Kazekage watched in dismay as the Six Tails had continued to avoid his gold dust ocean before jumping into the air, his eyes straining to see before opening wide. "Is that what I think it is?" he said to himself, not believing it. Seiken suddenly blasted a massive red beam of concentrated chakra towards the Kazukiage and his ocean of gold dust. The beam was so intense that it let loose massive shock waves into the air, traveling at a rapid rate towards its target. "Curse you!" The Kazukiage shouted, willing his gold dust to form as many layers as it could to protect him from the blast before it hit, creating a massive explosion that could be seen and felt for miles. The explosion was massive and could be seen for miles, letting a huge amount of smoke loose into the air. Final landed back onto the ground, the version 2 chakra cloak fading away, leaving him relatively unharmed. Of course, he had Seiken to thank for that, but it could wait until later. Final waited for the dust to settle before he saw the aftermath of his tailed beast bomb. The desert had a large crater in it, and the sand had been scorched black from the intense heat of the concentrated chakra. "I can't sense the Kazukiage," Final thought as he scouted the area for him. The gold dust had settled and scattered all over the place, mixing into the desert sand. "Maybe that blast killed him," Seiken said. Final squatted down, picking up a handful of the gold dust, before letting it run between his fingers, letting it fall back down to the sand. "We shouldn't let our guard down just yet," Final said as he stood up. Final walked through the desolate wasteland he had created as he searched for any signs of the Kazukiage. A few minutes passed as Final walked around before he heard a small cough coming from the distance. Final approached slowly before spotting that it was the Kazukiage, or what was left of him. He was severely injured and in bad shape. Half of his body was scorched from the blast. His left arm had also been ripped off along with his left leg from below the knee. Final looked down at him, taking in the state he was in. He didn't need to say anything witty or give him a snide remark. No, Final simply looked him in the eyes as he took his final breaths. "Why you?" the Kazukiage spoke. "Who are you?" he said, struggling to get his words out. Final took a moment before he allowed a bone to protrude from the palm of his hand. "I am Final, the Ice Devil of the Bloody Mist," he said as he allowed his ice-style chakra to coat his bone blade. The Kazukiage closed his eyes, accepting his defeat in full, ready to embrace the afterlife. Final struck the Kazukiage in the heart with his blade, his ice-style chakra pouring out, freezing the Kazukiage's body, preserving what was left of it in a block of ice. "This way, at least they will find your body," Final said, turning his back on the now-dead Kazukiage. He only took a brief moment before becoming serious once again. "Seiken, I need to borrow some of your chakra," he said as he focused. "Of course, Final," Seiken said, allowing him to tap into his reserves. Final made a couple of hand signs and focused hard, allowing the red chakra cloak to envelop his body, spreading two tails. Finishing his hand signs, Final opened his eyes as a crystal ice mirror formed in front of him. "I hope this works," he said as he stepped into the mirror. Hatsu was running as fast as he could to try and catch up with Ozawa and the princess. He could only hope that Ozawa was able to hold her own against the two Sandanbu shinobi until he arrived. Suddenly a massive explosion fired off far off in the distance. Even though it was still far, far away, Hatsu could still feel the intense shock waves that came off of it. "What in the?" he shouted as he used his arms to block the sand being kicked up from hitting his eyes. The shock waves ended after a moment, and Hatsu could see the massive smoke cloud that it had left. "Was that Captain Yuki?" he asked. He didn't have time to think about that now. He had to go and help Ozawa and secure the princess. After all, that was the mission. Hatsu turned and started running as quickly as he could once more, using his chakra to amplify his speed as much as possible. The dust cloud faded in the background as Hatsu continued to run through the desert. He wasn't sure how much time passed by, but the sun was starting to get low, now signaling it was mid-afternoon. "I have to hurry," he thought as he continued to run. Suddenly something started to glow on his shoulder, catching his attention and causing him to stop in his tracks. "What in the hell is that?" he thought as he watched it glow. "Is it a seal?" he said, trying to rip his jacket off before the seal could fully activate. Suddenly, the light coming off the seal started to grow cold before the chakra it was giving off formed a crystal ice mirror in the air next to him. Nothing happened for a moment, and Hatsu just stared at the jutsu very confused. Suddenly, Fina's reflection became visible before he stepped out of the mirror right in front of Hatsu. "What in the?" "Captain Yuki," Hatsu shouted in disbelief. Fina slipped out of the ice mirror and stepped onto the sand, allowing his red chakra cloak to fade as he looked at Hatsu. "Ah Hatsu, I'm glad you survived. I wasn't sure if the seal would work but looks like it did," Fina said, rubbing the back of his head. Hatsu looked very surprised, his mouth hanging wide open. "What in the hell was that?" he said before snapping upright. "I mean, what was that, Captain?" Hatsu corrected. Fina gave him a small smile. "Don't worry about formalities, Hatsu, please. Fina is fine." "Right," Hatsu said. Fina took a look around and noticed Hatsu was alone. "Where is the princess?" Fina said, suddenly becoming serious. Hatsu nodded. "I'm on my way to find her now. Ozawa was able to make a break for it, but two of their Anbu got past us. Forgive me, Captain. Let us make haste then, lead the way," Fina said as the two of them dashed off. "What happened to the rest of the squad?" Fina asked. Hatsu nodded. "Kaga won without any major injuries but was still wounded. Sawano, however, is hurt pretty bad. I'm not sure if he will make it," Hatsu said, turning to look where he was going. Fina nodded and continued to follow Hatsu towards Ozawa's location. Caption: I have to ask, how did you survive against the Kazakage, and what was that jutsu? Hatsu said, unable to contain his curiosity. Faina nodded. Well, for a start, that jutsu is something I am still experimenting on. I designed a seal that would allow my chakra to form an ice mirror that I could link with another I create, allowing for a sort of wormhole effect that lets me travel between the two. That was, I can travel a vast distance in almost an instant. Hatsu looked very confused, not understanding what the hell Faina was on about. It's like sort of teleporting, you could say, Faina said, trying to simplify it. As for the Kazakage, well, let's just say if not for a bit of help from a friend, I wouldn't be standing here with you now, Faina said with a small smile. Hatsu decided not to press the matter. After all, his captain had just defeated one of the 5 Kage. He was not someone that Hatsu wanted to piss off right now. The princess tried her best to run as far as possible, but she couldn't get far with her limited stamina. She could still hear the sounds of battle in the distance, and she decided her best bet was to hide and find cover. She had made it to a small river that flowed through the desert valley, taking shelter under a small rock, deciding to wait for someone to rescue her. I just know Captain Yuki will come for me, she said, trying not to lose hope. Meanwhile, Ozawa had been blasted by a wind-style dragon. The force of the jutsu had slapped her off the rocks and blasted her into the ground with tremendous force. She was in bad shape now, dehydrated and low on chakra. The wind style had done a lot of damage to her, leaving her unable to move. The Sandanbu was pleased with his work and could see that Ozawa was down and out for the count. Deciding not to waste any more time with her, he quickly used the body flicker to vanish. Ozawa could only watch as she lay flat on the ground in horror. No, princess. I have to save her, she said, struggling to get up. However, it was no use as she collapsed back down to the ground before her world became black. The princess had waited some time now and decided to have a look to see if the coast was clear. Poking her head out into the open, she took in all of her surroundings, listening for the slightest noise, all while gripping the kunai that Ozawa had given her tightly in both hands. She took a sigh of relief as she could see or hear nothing, and decided to stand up, walking over to the stream, grabbing a handful of water to drink. The princess splashed her face with some water before looking at a reflection as the ripples started to settle. A large shadow abruptly appeared behind her, and the princess turned around in horror, letting out a terrified scream as she tried to run away. Not so fast, your highness. The Anbu shouted as he grabbed her wrist and covered her mouth with his large hand, cutting her scream short. The princess tried to bite his hand, but it seemed to have no effect on the large man. Now, princess. Is that any way for a lady to behave? He said as he prized her jaw open to pull his hand free without hurting her. How dare you? Do you know who I am? The princess shouted as she kicked and screamed, trying to get free. She quickly pulled the kunai from her dress and tried to slash at the man, but he was too quick to react and grabbed her wrist, taking the blade off of her. Now that was dangerous. I'm under orders not to harm you, but this will make life much easier. I hope you can forgive me, he said with a natural tone. The princess's eyes opened wide as she realized he was going to knock her out, and she tried to scream one last time. Don't touch me. Help. She shouted before the Sandanbu hit her gently on the side of the neck, knocking her unconscious. Silence at last. The large man said, breathing a sigh of relief. I had better get back to Lord Kazakage with the princess, he said as he placed the princess's limp body over his shoulder. He turned and started to run, jumping high into the air ready to get out of the ravine, but for some reason, the Sandanbu could no longer feel the princess's weight on his shoulder, and turned his head to see her body had vanished. What in the? The large man shouted as he searched around for her, confused. Faina stood atop the cliff ahead with the unconscious princess on his shoulder. His expression was severe as he stared daggers at the Sandanbu. The large man could feel the pressure coming from Faina before he even set his eyes on him. The air around his was growing cold, causing the hairs on his massive arms to stand on end. You fucking missed, ninja. Always showing up one after the other. I've had it with a lot of you, the large man said, suddenly enraged. He tossed a handful of kunai with explosive tags attached to the ends of them, each hitting the cliff edge where Faina was standing. Take this, you little shit, the large man said as he started to form hand signs. The explosive kunai exploded, causing the cliff edge to cave, large rocks and boulders falling down, crashing into the water. Faina fell through the smoke and flipped in the air, allowing bones to protrude from all of his body, ready to use them to slice his opponent to shreds. Wind style. Pressure damage. The large Anbu shouted as he finished his hand signs and inhaled a massive amount of air. He blasted the massive amount of wind-style chakra at Faina, who was free-falling right towards him, taking a direct hit from the jutsu. The wind-style's pressure was so intense that it forced Faina high into the air, cutting his body all over from the sharp blades of wind chakra. I'm not done yet, the Sand Anbu shouted as he flipped back onto one of the cliff walls and made a few more quick hand signs. Wind style. Bite of the dragon jutsu, he shouted, the wind style around Faina gathering and taking the form of a massive dragon. Its jaws opened and smashed into Faina, dragging him down towards the ground before slamming him into the solid rock beneath. The wind from the jutsu scattered all over, kicking up a massive cloud of debris. The Sand Anbu took a breath and allowed his large muscles to relax as he waited for the smoke to clear. He woke over slowly and could see Fina's body had been smashed into the ground headfirst, only his legs sticking out of the hard stone. "Little runt. Thinking you could take me on?" he said as he grabbed Fina's leg before pulling his body out of the ground. To his surprise, Fina's body suddenly started to crumble as it turned into ice, his leg snapping in the large Anbu's hand. "What in the... a clone?" he shouted just before a foot struck him in the face, sending him flying through the air. The large man hit the stream of water and bounced off it hard before crashing into the ground, and then into the cleft wall. "Arg!" he screamed as his large body smashed into the cleft wall back first. The large man fell to the ground, unable to move as he tried to gather his bearings. He had never been struck so hard in his life, as he coughed large pools of blood onto the ground. Fina appeared in front of him with his arms crossed over his chest. Looking down at him, the air around him was cold, his eyes even more so. The Sand Anbu used all of his strength to look up at Fina, taking a good look at him, before realizing he was the kid that the Kazukiage had killed first. The realization hit him after a few moments. If he is alive and here, that must mean that. He thought as he looked Fina in the eyes. "It can't be Lord Kazukiage killed you," he said, trying to stand to his feet. Fina smiled, allowing all of his bones to protrude out of his body, along with the two horns on his head. The air around him grew even colder, and the Anbu started to shiver as the hairs on his arms began to freeze first. "The Kazukiage is dead," Fina said. His expression plain as day. The Sand Anbu used the wall behind him to hold himself up as terror filled his very soul. "No, you couldn't have. Lord Kazukiage is unbeatable. I'm afraid you won't get the chance to find out," Fina said as he closed his eyes. Nuo the Sand Anbu shouted as he tried to lunge for Fina one last time with his fist. Fina activated his jutsu, allowing his chakra to expel all around him, freezing anything within a 5-meter radius. The Sand Anbu's entire body froze in an instant, every cell in his body freezing in a mere moment, killing him without him even realizing. Fina closed his eyes and sighed in relief before letting his chakra settle down again. "That's the last of them," he said before using his body flicker to appear atop a cliff where he had safely placed the princess. "Time to regroup with the others," he said as he lifted her up and placed her on his shoulder. A while later, Fina had regrouped with his entire squad now, bringing the princess with him, who was still unconscious. Hatsu had found Ozawa and helped tend to her injuries. Once she had drunk her fill and rehydrated, she was almost as good as new. Kaga had been able to patch himself up, keeping his bleeding under control. However, the same could not be said for Sawano, who had succumbed to his wounds. Fina and the others stood around his body as they took a moment to bid farewell to their teammate. It was a strange custom to the others, as the ninja from the hidden mist didn't usually do this. Fina knew this well and decided to keep it short. Once they were done, Fina made a few hand signs before placing a seal on Sawano's body. "Body disposal jutsu," Fina said as he activated it. The seal came alive and started to burn away at Sawano's body until nothing but ashes were left. The Anbu tracking unit used this jutsu to ensure the enemy would not be able to get their hands on any of their remains if they failed a mission. "So what now, Captain Yuki?" Hatsu asked. The others also wondering the same thing. Fina turned to face his squad. The sunset was shining in the distance, its glow blocked by Fina's frame, letting his aura glow. "I think it is time to activate my emergency plan," Fina said. The others looked confused and Kaga spoke up. "What do you mean emergency plan, Captain?" he said. "We need to get the princess back to the land of water ASAP. This place will be crawling with enemy sand ninja before long," Fina said. The others agreed. They had found out that Fina had in fact defeated the Kazukiage, a feat that was extremely impressive and almost unheard of. "Hatsu and Ozawa, I have a new mission for the two of you," Fina said, causing Ozawa to snap to attention suddenly. "I need the two of you to return to the capital city and inform the daemon of what has happened here. Once done, you are to return to the Hidden Mist village at once," Fina said, crossing his arms. Ozawa nodded quickly. "Yes, Captain," she said. Hatsu nodded before speaking. "What about the rest of the princess's caravan, Captain?" he asked. Fina acknowledged his question. "Inform the daemon that he is to offer an escort for them back to the land of water. It's too risky for the two of you to escort them back yourselves," Fina said. "They will be safe in the capital for the time being. I will escort the princess back home along with Kaga, so his injuries can be tended to," Fina said. The others all agreed to the plan, but couldn't help notice Fina's serious tone of voice. Hatsu nodded to Fina and bid farewell. Just before he and Ozawa turned to leave, Fina said one last thing. "Hatsu, Ozawa, be careful, as of now. We are at war with the Hidden Sand Village." Fina had returned the princess back to the land of water. He had also delivered Kaga back safely to recover from his wounds, getting him to the hospital in the Hidden Mist. Thanks to his new teleportation abilities, Fina was able to make short work of the journey. He had already left seals in his apartment, meaning that once activated, it created an ice mirror for him to link with another, allowing him to slip through the two of them like a wormhole. Fina had first tested it out on Hatsu for long distance, and soon found that he could activate his seals from anywhere, virtually allowing him to travel from one side of the globe to the other through his ice mirrors in an instant. Sure, it wasn't as impressive as the fourth Hokage's flying region, but still, it was extremely useful. Final had ordered Kaga to report to the Mizukichi once his wounds had been tended to, while he let the princess rest in his apartment. The Land of Water's capital city was not far from the Hidden Mist village, and Final would escort the princess there himself once she woke up. While she was still unconscious, he decided it was best that he took a shower. After all, they were far from danger now as no one knew they were even there. Final turned the shower on and stripped his exhausted clothing onto the cold tiled floor. His body was beaten and bruised after his battle with the Kazukiage, and if not for his increased healing factor thanks to Seiken, he would be feeling one hell of a lot of pain right now. He stepped into the shower and let the hot water wash away the sweat and dirt. He could still feel bits of sand and gold dust washing down his body and out of his hair. Looks like going to the beach is the same in both worlds, he thought to himself. You always bring it home with you, he said out loud with a small chuckle. Final was laughing a little longer than he should have been and realized how crazy things had gotten since his arrival in this world. He basked in the hot water for just a little longer before getting out of the shower. The mirror had steamed over thanks to the heat. Final wrapped a towel around his waist and wiped his hand over the condensation on the mirror to look at his reflection. Looking at his reflection for what seemed the longest time, his body was going through a lot of changes. His muscles were starting to grow. He was beginning to grow more body hair, and most of all, he was starting to get a couple of spots. Thankfully, a little medical ninjutsu seemed to clear them right up, allowing for clear skin. Very convenient. Final decided he had spent enough time in the bathroom. It was time to get dressed and ready to escort the princess back to her father. Final opened the bathroom door. To his surprise, he came face to face with the princess, who was now awake. See caption Yuki. She shouted as her eyes opened wide, realizing who he was. She leapt at him, wrapping her arms around his body, squeezing tight. I just knew you would rescue me. I just knew it, she shouted, tears coming to her eyes. Final was quite shocked as he had not known she was even there, thanks to him letting his thoughts cloud his senses. He put his arms around her and just let her cry for a moment. She pulled away to look at him, taking her only a moment to realize that Final was dressed in nothing but a towel that was wrapped around his waist. The princess started to go a little red in the face before she pushed away from him, giving a small yelp as she tripped on something. Final quickly grabbed her wrist and pulled her back to her feet, saving her from falling over. The two of them locking eyes for a moment before she looked away. I better get dressed, Final said. The princess nodded as she took a look at his body before looking away once more. She was no longer the confident, flirtatious princess she had been before. Now she seemed shy, as if she was hiding her feelings. Final didn't pay any attention after all. She was still a child in his eyes. Yes, that would be best, the princess said, taking another look before looking away once more. Final pulled out another Hidden Mist uniform. Of course, he had quite a few spares. Once dressed, Final walked back into the living room where the princess was waiting for him. She was sat with one leg crossed behind the other, and her back was perfectly straight. Final cleared his throat, getting her attention. Alright princess, are you ready to go home? Final said, smiling at her. She nodded and stood to her feet. Lead the way, Captain Yuki, she said with a determined face. On the way back to the capital, Final told the princess that all of her maids and servants were safe, that his team had gotten them to safety. The princess was relieved to hear it as she voiced her concern about the hidden sand coming after her. Final assured her that she was safe now, and that they would not be able to reach her in the Land of Water. But what if that Kazukiage decides to come after me again? She shouted, still sounding worried. Final placed a hand on her shoulder as he looked her in the eyes. He will not be coming after you anymore, princess. I promise you that, Final said, his words giving her confidence. Once that was over, Final escorted her in secret back to the capital of the Land of Water. He wanted to make sure nobody would recognize her, as he only wanted the Mizukichi to find out when Kaga informed him. Lucky nobody had seen them, and Final made it to the capital with the princess without any more trouble. Once there, he allowed her to take her head down, and the two of them headed towards the palace, where they were met by the guards who immediately ran over to her. It's the princess, one of them shouted. Princess Mizuko, you are alive. Another shouted as they escorted her inside without hesitation. Where is my father? She demanded, not answering one of their questions. The guards shut their mouths and nodded. This way, princess, they said as they escorted her to the daemon's chambers. The daemon was currently surrounded by his advisors, shouting about what had happened in the Land of Wind. Of course, word had already reached their ears, and the daemon sounded outraged. Their words were cut short as the doors opened as the princess walked through, her presence demanding the attention of everyone inside. Mizuko, the daemon shouted in disbelief. Father, she shouted as the two of them ran to one another, the daemon embracing his daughter in a massive hug. Oh, my dear Mizuko. You are alive, he said, grabbing her shoulders so he could get a good look at her. I'm fine, father, she said with a small smile. I just got the news. The hidden sand ninja attacked you, he shouted, examining her body for any injuries. Did they hurt you? He asked, getting angry once again. No, father, I am unharmed thanks to my shinobi bodyguards, she said, looking at Final. All the advisors started chatting amongst themselves as they examined Final. The daemon also looked over to Final and nodded to him. You have my gratitude, young shinobi. the daimon said before he sat back down in his chair. Summon the war council. I also want the Mizukichi here at once. He shouted, slamming his fist down hard onto the large oak table, getting the attention of everyone in the large hall. Sometime later the daimon had put out a summons for his war council, calling every political leader in the land of water to attend, including the Mizukichi. He sat on one end of the large round oak table accompanied by Faina, while all of the others sat around the outside with the daimon at the opposite end. Full word had spread about the battle in the land of wind, which had resulted in the death of the fourth Kazukichi by Faina's hand. However, the main issue was that the land of water and land of wind was supposed to enter into a peace treaty, which the Kazukichi had broken to try and kidnap Princess Mizuko. The daimon of the land of water was outraged by this, and demanded that the land of water go to war with the hidden sand village. My lord, I have his lordship of the land of wind on the line for you. One of the advisors said above the shouting that was currently going on. Put him on. The daimon said as everyone went quiet waiting to see what happened. A large television of some sort was wheeled into the room and set up so that everyone could see it. The screen flashed to life and a picture of the daimon to the land of wind could be seen. Is it on? The man shouted before he looked into the camera on his side. Can you see me? He asked. Yes, I can see you. The daimon of the land of water said. Good. First off, allow me to give my apologies about this whole ordeal. The wind daimon said, seeming sincere. I want you to know that I had nothing to do with this. In fact, I had only just finished discussing the terms of our agreement with your sweet daughter Mizuko. How's she, by the way? He asked. The water daimon leaned forwards in his chair, interlocking his fingers together as he spoke. I thank you for your words in this challenging time, my old friend. Of course, I have had all the details thus far, and am confident that the Kazukichi acted alone for his own gain. The wind daimon nodded and leaned back in his chair. Yes, and the fool paid for it with his life. That being said, you can understand my frustration at the whole ordeal. The water daimon said, sighing. Let me stop you there, old friend. The wind daimon said. Before you go any further, what more are you looking to gain? Your daughter is home safe and sound. The Kazukichi of my country is dead. Don't tell me you are seeking what I think you are. There was a moment of silence as everyone in the room waited for the water daimon to speak. Suddenly, the Mizukichi stood from his seat, raising his voice over the water daimon. The daimon looked at the Mizukichi in outrage, but quickly shut his mouth at the hard gaze Iguro gave him. I think what the daimon here is trying to say is that he is simply hurt that something like this would happen under your watch. I personally think justice has already been served, and that we should use this as a stepping stone to learn from. Everyone in the room was shocked, including Faina. It was certainly not like the Mizukichi to turn down the opportunity for war, and Faina couldn't help but wonder why. Thank you for your words, Lord Mizukichi. The wind daimon also said, sounding interested. The water daimon was about to object, but he was cut off once again by the Mizukichi who ended the call with the wind daimon. What is the meaning of this, Lord Mizukichi? The daimon shouted. Iguro simply crossed his arms as he sat back down. War is not an option right now. We do not have the manpower or resources. Not to mention, once a war starts, the other great nations will soon be at our doorstep. We have already achieved victory with the death of the fourth Kazukichi. The water daimon had to admit he hadn't thought of all of that, but he still was not happy about the Mizukichi stepping on his toes. Very well. All that matters is that Mizuko is safe and that the Kazukichi paid with his life, he said, taking the high ground. Iguro nodded with a smile. Now if we are done, I have matters to attend to, he said, standing once more. It was very noticeable that his presence seemed to put all of the nobles on edge, including the daimon. But it was clear that he used that to his advantage. Very well. The water daimon said as he too stood from his seat. I bid you farewell, he said before turning and leaving the room with his daughter. Mizuko looked at Faina one last time and whispered something into her father's ear. He turned to look at Faina and gave her a nod as he walked out of the room with his advisors. Mizuko walked over to Faina, who was stood next to the Mizukichi. Iguro noticed her and then looked to Faina with a smile. Make it quick, he said as he walked away. Faina nodded and turned to face the princess. I just wanted to say thank you again, Captain Yuki, she said, looking a little sheepish. Faina nodded and smiled at her. Please, Princess Mizuko. It was my honor. Also, call me Faina, he said with a small bow. The princess bowed lower than he did as a sign of respect for saving her life. If there is ever anything I can do for you, Captain. I mean, Faina. Please do not hesitate to ask. After all, I owe my life to you. Faina nodded and went on to say his farewell before he walked back over to the Mizukichi who was waiting for him outside of the daemon's estate. Faina appeared next to him, giving him a slight nod. Sorry for making you wait, Lord Mizukichi. Iguro pushed off against the wall he was leaning on and gave Faina a stern look. We have a lot to discuss, Faina, he said, turning his back for him to follow. Time skip on. Faina and the Mizukichi had finished up at the daemon's estate. They returned to the Hidden Mist village, and Faina found himself in Iguro's office to give a full debrief of the mission. Of course, Kaga had already given him as much detail as he could, but now it was time for him to hear it from the horse's mouth. The Mizukichi seemed unimpressed about how the mission had gone, and even more so once he told him what happened with the Kazukichi. Final felt as if he was being scolded, as if he was a student getting told off by a teacher, and he didn't like it. Although defeating the Kazekage in battle is no small feat, you leave me with no choice but to place you under house arrest. You will be stripped of your Anbu rank and placed on normal duties. Final was shocked, to say the least, and looked up at Yagura. But Lord Mizukage, he would have taken the princess if I didn't. Do not talk back to me. Yagura shouted as he let his aura flare to life. Final had to admit that his killing intent was no joke, and he decided to bite his tongue for now. Yagura sighed as he let his aura settle down, taking a seat in his chair as he did so. You have to understand, Final. This is for your own good. Because of what you have done, your name will spread across the great nations like wildfire. You will become the target of assassination attempts as the Sand look for revenge over their fallen Kage. The death of a Kage is not taken lightly. For that reason, I have to keep you in the village so I can keep an eye on you. Final could kind of understand when he put it like that, but he was still not happy about being under house arrest. Still, what choice did he have? Yagura finished giving Final a lecture, and the room went silent. Just tell me you understand and won't do anything without my say-so for a while, Yagura said. Final nodded and bowed his head. I understand, Lord Mizukage. Very well, you are dismissed, he said, watching Final as he up and walked out of his office. As the door closed, Yagura's eyes suddenly turned red as they reflected the Sharingan, and the shadow of a man appeared behind him, dressed in a dark robe with an orange mask that had black stripes across it. I will certainly be keeping an eye on this one, he said before fading back into the darkness from whence he came. 6 months had gone by since Final had been placed under house arrest. It may have been called house arrest, but it was more like village arrest. Final had been stripped of his Anbu command and rank, being placed on regular duties, so that the Mizukage could keep an eye on him. He was allowed to roam the village freely but was forbidden to leave. The Mizukage had also assigned a small squad of Anbu to keep tabs on him, but Final spent most of his time keeping them confused about his whereabouts. For the last 6 months, Final had spent his time training to hone his abilities, but he had to say that not being allowed to leave the village was starting to drive him crazy. He would come up with little things now and again to keep himself entertained, though his favorite at the moment was to slip away from the Anbu, only to give them hints of his whereabouts, almost like a game of hide and seek. But even that got boring after a while. Final was also still allowed to see his old team and friends. He had become very close to Hatsu and Kaga ever since the incident with the Kazekage. Speaking of which, the Hidden Sand had not taken the event lightly. They had already sent assassins after Final, but each of them had fallen to his blade. The amount became less and less until they seemed to stop coming altogether. Final's reputation was becoming more and more infamous as time went on, especially as he continued to avoid and kill each assassin that was sent his way. They had also elected the 5th Kazekage. If Final remembered correctly, her name was Kakura the Scorched Style. He wasn't sure of how it worked in the Hidden Sand, but apparently, she was only acting Kage until a particular clan was of age. Which Final assumed was Gar, who was about 2 years old at this point. But of course, as usual, most of Final's time was put into his training. Mostly Final had been working on his control of Seiken's chakra. Other than that, he had been doing the usual Taijutsu practice, chakra control, and utilizing his KekkaiGenkai into his fighting style. Final's Shikatsu had become second nature, and he could use it as easy as moving his fingers. Final had also poured so much time into his ice style, that he had even come up with a few more jutsu, as well as improving on all of his others. But he still felt that something was missing. During one of his long meditation sessions, Final had an idea come to him. Sage mode. He thought as his eyes snapped open. He knew that Naruto could use Sage mode, thanks to his summoning the Toads of Mount Maiboku. Even Orochimaru could access Sage Jutsu thanks to his snake summoning. So that begged the question too if Final's own summoning could help him. Well, I guess it's time to give these Anbu the slip again, he said as he made the hand signs. Reverse summoning jutsu, he said as he placed his hand on the floor of his apartment, disappearing in a poof of white smoke. Final opened his eyes, finding himself in the land of his summoning creature, fire. It was always freezing, and the snow was blowing in so strong you could barely see in front of yourself. Thankfully Final knew his way around and made his way through the thick snow towards Fire's cave. Fire! Final shouted as he entered. It was quiet for a moment before the large yeti appeared from the darkness, surprised to see Final. Final, is it you? He asked, his tone deep. Yes, old friend, how are your injuries? Final asked, remembering Fayu had helped him battle against the 4th Kazekage. Fayu grabbed his large bicep as he flexed in good health. Don't you worry about me. I'm as strong as ever. Takes more than that guy to put me down for good. Speaking of which, you won, right? Fayu said with his deep voice. Final smiled as he crossed his arms over his chest. I did. But it was not easy, Final said. Fayu burst out laughing as he slammed his fist off the floor. You don't say. That's what happens when you fight someone of Kage level. The two of them laughed a little before it went silent once more. So tell me, Final, why are you here? It's not like you to just pop in for a visit, Fayu asked with a questioning look. Final stood back to his feet as he placed his hands by his sides. Nothing gets past you, Fayu, he said with a smile. But you are right. I'll cut to the chase. Faina said, looking Fayu in the eye. I have come to ask if you know anything about Sage Jutsu, Faina asked. Fayu looked a little puzzled at first, but then gave a monstrous laugh. Sage Jutsu, he shouted between laughing. Once he was done, he looked down at Faina with a serious expression. Now where did you hear about such a thing? He asked. Faina was surprised at Fayu's question, and was quick to answer with a lie. I overheard some of the elders talking about how the first Hokage of the leaf could use such a power, rendering him almost invincible. I didn't know who else to ask. Fayu seemed to buy Faina's story and took the bait. It is true I know of Sage Jutsu. However, I cannot use it myself. Faina seemed disappointed but tried his best to hide it. What can you tell me about it? He asked quickly. Fayu sighed and stood slowly to his full height. I can tell you are going to give up on this without a fight. If that is the case, I will take you to someone who knows much more than I Faina. I may not look it, but I am only 30 years old and am still young among my kind. Fayu said, surprising Faina. Really? I had no idea. Does that mean there are more of your kind? Faina asked. Fayu nodded as he crossed his arms. I think it is time you meet the elder little Faina. Faina nodded as Fayu turned around. Hop on, kid, he said, patting his shoulder for Faina to jump onto. Faina did just that and jumped high up onto Fayu's massive hairy shoulder. Fayu walked deeper into the cave and deeper into the darkness. Faina's eyes struggled to adjust, but as they approached the end of the cave, they came face to face with a giant ice hole. What is this? Faina asked as he reached out to touch the ice. Fayu chuckled. This is a door, he said as he placed his massive hand onto it. Suddenly the solid ice started to ripple as if it was water. Only members of my kind can enter through this ice. It's how we have survived for so long, Fayu said as he looked at Faina. Are you ready? Fayu said as he stepped into the ice, passing through it like a portal. Faina had to shield his eyes as the level of light changed, once more becoming very bright. As he opened his eyes, he was met by a beautiful snowy mountain peak, with a village spread around it. There were a number of other Yeti going about their business, but Faina noticed that none of them was as large as Fayu. Is this real? I have never heard of such a place existing, Faina said. Fayu walked down the large stone steps that passed the shrine that was on the other side of the ice wall, heading down into the village. Just because you have never heard of something before, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. As Fayu walked into the village, he was met with praise and greeted by every other Yeti that was there as if he was some kind of hero. He greeted each of them, and all of them showed surprise at Faina's presence. Each of them was large, standing at least 10 feet tall, but none of them even came close to Fayu's height. They really seemed to like you, Fayu, Faina said. Fayu smiled as he continued to make his way through the village. Well, I am what you would call a warrior of my kind. I am tasked with guarding the ice gate. It is something of a great honor of my kind, the large Yeti said as he carried on walking through the village. He approached another large set of steps that seemed to go all the way to the top of the mountain, and started to make his way up them. Faina decided to stay quiet for the time being and just watch. The view was terrific, and Faina was still amazed about this whole thing. Even with all of his knowledge from his other life, he had never known of such a place. He guessed there were still many mysteries about this world that he had never seen before. As he and Fayu approached the top of the steps, Faina could see two large pillars that had open flames on top of them. The large shrine had been built into the mountain's peak, and on either side of the large door stood two more powerful-looking Yeti. Each of them noticed Faina on Fayu's shoulder and readied their Sasamata to attack him. What is the meaning of this, Fayu? One of them shouted. Faina noticed that both of the Yeti in front of him were each the same size as Fayu. One of them had a large scar across his face, and Faina could tell each of them were battle-hardened. Calm yourselves, Kurai, Fubuki. This is Faina Yuki, Fayu said with his arms raised. Both of the Yeti slowly lowered their weapons with a questioning look. Did you say, Yuki? Kurai said. That's right. I have brought him to meet with the elder, Fayu said. Both of the large Yeti seemed to relax and place the butts of their Sasamata back onto the ground. Very well, Fayu, you may pass, Kurai said. Could have given us a little notice, eh? The other one said as he cracked his knuckles. Let's do this, Kurai. The large Yeti shouted as both of them turned around and started pushing as hard as they could on the massive doors, forcing the ice that had frozen them shut to break. Faina could tell that both the Yeti were trying their hardest, using all of their strength to push the doors open as their muscles bulged. Both of them yelled as they continued to push as hard as they could. Do they need some help? Faina asked. Fayu scoffed at Faina's question. There's only one among us that can open these doors alone. Who is that? Faina asked. You are about to find out, Fayu said as the doors finally started to slide along the floor and opened, the heavy doors screeching along the stone tabs on the floor before hitting the inner walls, signaling they had fully opened. Both Yeti were breathing hard now as they walked back outside, huffing and puffing. Faina could see that small oil lamps lit the inner hall, and at the very end was a large shrine with a throne made of solid ice. Fayu entered the hall and sat on his knees as he told Faina to jump off his shoulder and do the same. Of course, he did and took a kneeling position next to the 20-foot Yeti next to him. The room seemed so much larger now as he waited for what came next. Heavy footsteps caught his attention, and he could only imagine what kind of insanely powerful monster could be the leader of this clan of Yeti. The footsteps got closer and closer as whoever was causing them got closer. The anticipation was killing Faina, but he was able to hold the urge in and wait. To Faina's surprise, a small hairy little white yeti with a walking stick appeared. The creature was even shorter than he was, its back was hunched, and it had 2 small horns on its head. Fayu bowed, placing his head onto the stone floor, paying his respect to the small yeti. Fayu noticed that Faina didn't bow and poked him with his large finger, pressing him down to the ground. Now Fayu, pick yourself up," the old yeti said as he hopped up onto the large throne with surprising grace. Faina also lifted his head off the floor as Fayu introduced him. "Great Elder Hanketsu. This is Faina Yuki," Fayu said. The elder yeti's feet were dangling from the massive throne he was sat on as he looked over to Faina, seeming amused. "My oh my. I haven't seen a member of the Yuki clan since little Shimo. I thought they were all dead," he said, hopping off his seat. "He sorted me out with the reverse summoning jutsu, Great Elder. After I deemed him worthy, I allowed him to sign a contract with myself," Fayu said, still sitting on his knees. The old yeti was stood right in front of Faina now as he examined him, prodding him with his walking stick. "This one looks strong," Hanketsu said. "Must be if he was able to defeat you in battle, little Fayu," he continued to say. "Shimo was my grandfather, although I didn't know him well," Faina said, speaking up. Hanketsu pulled his hair from over his bright blue eyes to get a better look at Faina. "Ah, now that you mention it, I can see him in you," Hanketsu said as he started to sniff Faina, taking in his scent. "It would seem you have also brought along something else. Something you carry inside of you, young Faina," the little yeti said. Faina seemed stunned, and Seiken's voice snapped him out of it. "He can sense me, Faina," Seiken said. Faina concentrated a little so he could enter his inner world to speak to Seiken. "What do you mean he can sense you?" he asked. "Do you think you can chat amongst yourselves without me being able to see?" Hanketsu said as he was sat in the snow inside Faina's inner world, surprising both him and Seiken. Faina opened his eyes and jumped back away from the small yeti almost on guard. Fayu seemed very surprised at his reaction and stood to his feet. However, Hanketsu waved his walking stick, signing for him to stay out of it. "How did you do that?" Faina asked, confused. Hanketsu smiled a toothy smile, his large fangs showing through his hair. "Why don't you just ask what you have come to ask, little Faina? I take it you are here to learn how to use Sage Jutsu," Hanketsu said, placing both hands on the top of his walking stick. Faina was again surprised but decided to relax just a little, deciding he should cut to the chase. "Very well. I asked Fayu to bring me here, so that I could learn about Sage Jutsu." Hanketsu turned his back, taking a few steps away before turning to face Faina once again. "There was only one other human that has ever asked me to teach them Sage Jutsu. That was your grandfather Shimo. I will give you the same test that I gave him. If you pass, I will teach you how to use Sage Jutsu, but if you fail, you will never be able to access nature energy," Hanketsu said as he allowed his walking stick to drop to the floor. Faina took only a moment to think about what the elder said to him, but Fayu spoke up, not able to stay quiet any longer. "This is not an easy path, Faina. Please, you must think about this seriously. You only get one chance, and even then if your body isn't strong enough, you will not be able to learn it in the first place." The elder yeti gave a small chuckle before waving his hand towards Fayu. "Be quiet and let the child make up his own mind." Fayu bit his tongue, instantly going quiet as the elder ordered, leaving Faina in silence to think about his decision. "I accept," Faina said as he looked into the elder's eyes, his determination blazing like a small fire in a blizzard. "Very well, just so you know, little Shimo failed this test," Hanketsu said as he suddenly struck the air with his small fist. The force he generated sent a huge shockwave through the air that smashed into Faina so hard that the force sent him flying. The attack was so fast that Faina hadn't even seen it coming. The blast carried him through the air and slammed him into the massive doors, both of them slamming open due to Faina hitting them so hard. Faina hit the floor hard and rolled down the solid stone steps before finally stopping still. His body felt as if it had been hit by a train, and it took him a moment before he could even see straight. Seiken's voice was ringing in his ears over and over again as Faina tried to pull himself up. But the blast had done more than just hurt him physically. It had also drained him of all of his chakra. "Faina, you must wake up," Seiken shouted. Faina was finally able to stand, but the effort felt as if it drained the rest of his energy. "Seiken, I need some chakra," he said through struggling breaths. "I'm trying, Faina, but it doesn't seem to be working," the tailed beast said, seeming worried. Faina's eyes opened wide as he forced himself to climb back up the large stone steps towards the doors he had been blasted out of. Once he finally reached the top, he was met by Kurai and Fubuki, who seemed to be looking at him very surprised. "Looks like I owe you dinner, Kurai," Fubuki said, looking at his friend. "This one will fail just like the last," Fubuki said, slamming his weapon butt into the ground. Faina was pissed now, and he tried to pull out Seiken's chakra by force. However, it didn't seem to be working. "I am sorry, Faina, but it doesn't seem like I can give you any of my chakra. It's as if something is stopping me from inside your own body. What did that bastard do to me?" Faina shouted as he slammed his fist down onto the ground in frustration. Both Kurai and Fubuki watched him with interest. "Come on, kid. Didn't the old man tell you anything?" Kurai said. "What do you mean?" Final asked, almost sound desperate. You always do this, Kirai. Fubuki said, crossing his arms over his giant chest. Come on, Fubuki. It could make things more interesting. Kirai said as he crouched down to speak to Final. Look, kid. You can't use any chakra, right? Final nodded, still confused. And the only way to get it back is to get through these doors back to the old man, right? Final took a moment to think about it and nodded. Right, he said. But there is another way. You see, if you decide you can no longer pursue this endeavor of yours, all you have to do is leave through the giant ice wall. Once you pass through it, all of your chakra will be restored. But be warned. You will never be able to pass through into this realm again. Final didn't speak as the words from the giant yeti sunk in hard. This is what the old man meant by you only have one chance, Final thought. He looked up past the large yeti to the doors. Now the only question was how he was supposed to open them by himself, when even the giant yeti struggled to do it together. This was a test. This would determine how far he could go in this world. This would determine whether he could obtain the power to achieve his goals, or whether he would let it crush them. Final pulled himself up off his knees as he tried to muster the strength to stand. The wind blew hard as the chill in the air bit his cheeks. He was still breathing hard, trying to catch his breath, his lungs burning from the cold air. I can do this, he muttered. Both of the large yetis stared down at him, each noting his determination. Looks like he's gonna try, Kirai. Fubuki said with a small smile. Final suddenly burst forwards into a sprint, planting his hands onto the massive doors, as he tried to open them with all of his might. Final screamed as the veins in his head bulged, looking as if they would burst. Well, the kid sure has guts. I'll give him that, Kirai said, looking down as he gave a sign. They both watched for a while as Final continued to push and push, until his body had almost burned out. Kirai turned to his fellow yeti, smiling at him. Think we should tell him, he said as he shrugged his shoulders. Fubuki crossed his arms as he pretended not to care. Do what you want, Kirai, I don't care. Final had finally burnt out now, his face bright red from his effort. He felt exhausted, and his muscles were burning and throbbing in pain. Having no chakra made him realize just how weak he was without it, making him feel powerless. Final fell to his knees as he tried to catch his breath. It's impossible, I can't open these blasted doors, he said, his anger getting the better of him. Kirai walked over to him, sighing as he knelt to get a better look at Final. Look, kid. You can't open these doors with brute strength alone. Why do you think the old man sealed your chakra away? Kirai said as he pulled Final to his feet. Use your head, Yuki child. You must know the answer by now. Final let the yeti's words sink in for a moment before the answer slapped him right in the face. Sage mode. Final realized now that only with Sage Jutsu could he open the doors and get his chakra back. Now the only question was how he would go about learning Sage mode. Suddenly the doors fling open, and Final was blasted back by the force alone. It sent him flying towards the massive set of stairs. However, he was saved by Kirai as he grabbed the back of his shirt, stopping him from falling down them. Hanketsu slowly walked out of the hall, the massive doors closing behind him. Sorry about that. Sometimes I forget my own strength, the little yeti said, giving a small chuckle. Kirai put Final back onto the ground, and he dusted himself off. What the hell is with this old geezer? He thought. Hanketsu walked over to Final. So you know now that you can only open these doors with the use of natural energy, little Yuki, the old yeti said. Final was about to speak, but Hanketsu started to walk down the large steps as if he was ignoring him. Wait. Final shouted as he ran after him. Please teach me how to use Sage mode. I can't give up. Final shouted, almost begging. Hanketsu turned to study him and gave a long pause before he answered. I will teach you how to use Sage Jutsu, little Yuki. But I promise you it will not be easy. With that said, he turned and started to walk down the steps, beckoning Final to follow him. Time passes. Final had followed Hanketsu down the mountain until they reached a frozen lake. The old yeti didn't say much of anything, and Final had to wonder what the hell they were doing here. Wondering what we are doing here yet, Hanketsu said as if reading his mind. Final had to say that it did seem strange, but so far, everything the old yeti had done was just that. Now then, little Yuki, Hanketsu said, turning to face him. Your first test is to cross this frozen lake and fetch me my walking cane. Without it, I might fall. Final looked at the old yeti. But your walking cane is in your hand, Final said, pointing to it. Is that right? Hanketsu said as he suddenly tossed the stick all the way over to the other side of the lake, where it stuck into the snow. Of course. Final thought, wanting to slap himself in the face. He turned to look across the ice, weighing up the distance with just a glance. Final took his first step onto the frozen lake, testing the ice's strength to see if it would hold his weight. So far, so good. The ice was holding under Final's weight as he took each step with grace. He was starting to wonder just how this would help him learn Sage mode, but he had guessed maybe it was just a test before they started the real training. Even so, Final wouldn't let his guard down. Final took another step and suddenly, the ice cracked under his foot. He froze on the spot as he tried to distribute his weight onto his other leg. However, the ice under his other foot cracked as he did. Oh shit, he said as the ice beneath him gave way and he fell into the freezing cold water. Final slowly pulled himself out of the water, shivering as he stood. The air was so cold that his wet clothes had almost frozen in an instant. If not for his bloodline ability and resistance to the cold, Fina's body would have already given in to hypothermia. You will have to try harder than that if you don't want to fall in, Hanketsu shouted, chuckling. Fina wasn't pleased and turned around, ready to keep moving across the ice. Laugh it up, old man, Fina said, looking down at the ice once more. This time, Fina decided to break into a sprint, thinking that he wouldn't fall in if he didn't give the ice time to break. He was still moving quickly even with his chakra sealed. His lungs were burning from the cold air, but he continued to push as hard as he could. The ice started cracking under his feet. Each time his feet moved, the ice gave way, seeming as if it was chasing after him. Fina could see that the breaking ice was catching up with him. Deciding that he had to act swiftly, he jumped, avoiding the ice-cold water, and landing on a small piece of ice that was floating. Fina had managed not to fall into the water, but now he was stuck on a small floating island of ice, with nowhere to go. Didn't think that one through now, did you, little Yuki? Hanketsu shouted, mocking him once again. Without his chakra, Fina was helpless at the moment. He had no way to jump off of the ice without landing in the water. He knew this and so decided to take the plunge into the freezing cold before climbing out onto a fresh sheet of ice. He was breathing hard now, his body working on overdrive to try and keep warm. He could tell something was off. Typical, the cold would have never bothered him. I forgot to mention, little Yuki. Even though you possess the Yuki clan's blood and are resistant to even freezing temperatures, these waters are different. A normal person not of Yuki blood would have died as soon as they fell into this water. However, with your blood, you should be able to withstand it about 3 or 4 times before you die. Fina was shocked and turned around, enraged. What, he shouted. The old yeti just smiled before waving his hands. Now don't get all strumpy. Hurry up and fetch my cane. Fina knew he had no choice. He was already halfway across the lake, and his chances were about the same either way. However, he had to choose between giving up and learning Sage Mode. Fina took another look over towards Hanketsu, who gave him a toothy grin, and then over towards the cane. Looks like it's do or die, he said quietly under his breath. Fina closed his eyes and filled his lungs with the freezing air. I can do this, I have to, Fina said as he took another step. The ice cracked under his foot again, and he winced. Blast it. Fina thought as he looked down at the ice. What am I supposed to do? Every time I take a step, this bloody ice cracks on me. Come on, Fina, think. What should I do? Think, damn it, think. Fina thought as he closed his eyes, trying to think. His mind was blank as he tried to draw on anything that he thought could help him now. Suddenly the memory of Naruto's Sage Mode training entered his mind. He remembered that in order for him to draw on nature energy, he had to remain still. The only question now was how did that apply to this exercise? Be one with nature. Fina suddenly thought, his eyes popping open. I have to be on with nature, he said, looking down at his feet. He took another deep breath as he tried to let his body relax. Again and again, he took more deep breaths, allowing all of his worries to fade into the cold. Fina lifted his leg, taking another step, slowly placing his foot onto the ice. This time the ice didn't crack, and so he moved again, slowly and gracefully, until it seemed he was gliding across the ice. Hanketsu looked on from a distance, impressed, to say the least, that Fina had managed to figure out what he needed to do. That boy, maybe he stands a chance. Fina had now reached the other side and took a step onto the snowy bank safety off of the ice. Walking over, he picked up the cane and turned to face Hanketsu, waving the cane at him to emphasize that he had got it. Hanketsu smiled and clapped his hands together. Not bad, little Yuki, not bad. He shouted over, his voice surprising clear from the other side of the lake. Now comes the real challenge. Make it back before there is no ice, Hanketsu said, cracking his knuckles. Fina was once again confused as to what he meant. What do you mean? He asked. Hanketsu slowly walked over to the edge of the frozen lake, taking his time, of course. He lifted his arm into the air and smashed his fist down onto the ice, causing a massive crack to form, splitting the ice that covered the lake in half. Fina now knew what the old yeti meant, and he was starting to panic. Oh, crap. He shouted as all of the ice started to break apart as the water became violent from Hanketsu's strike. Fina had no choice and made a break for it, dashing as fast as he could from one bit of ice to the other. He had no time to think about it, no time to be one with nature. He just had to haul it as fast as possible, or be swallowed by the icy waters below. Fina flipped and jumped, trying his best not to slip on the ice. His footing was everything now, and if he didn't play it right, what was left of the ice would break and drop him into the water. Fina jumped onto another piece of solid ice and started to run. Suddenly the ice split and he was forced to stop, skidding all the way to the edge. The lake was getting more and more violent now as the waves started to grow larger. His next footing was a long jump away, and he wasn't sure if he could make it, but with the size of the wave that was heading for him, he didn't have much choice. Fina jumped, pushing off with his legs as hard as he could, willing himself to make the jump. However, it was too far as it looked like he was about to hit the water. A small sheet of ice suddenly floated to the surface of the water. Fina could tell it wasn't strong enough to hold his weight, and it left him with only one option. One with nature. he thought as he tried his best to relax his body, his foot hitting the ice. Fainar used the same foot to push off the ice hard and with perfect timing, allowing him to spring over the remaining water onto the safety of more ice. "I made it," he shouted as he skidded along the ice before jumping onto the bank, where he dropped to his back, trying to catch his breath. Hamketsu slowly walked over to his, and Fainar lifted his arm in the air, holding the cane up for the small yeti to see. "Well done, little Yuki, well done. I wasn't sure if you would make it there, but hey ho," the yeti said as he took his cane and started walking off slowly. "What the hell?" Fainar shouted as he stood up, still trying to catch his breath. Hamketsu turned around slowly. "I thought I warned you this wouldn't be easy." Fainar remembered his words before they had started. He was still determined to finish his training and master Sage Mode. He knew it wouldn't be easy and had to deal with that. "Now stop whining like a baby and follow me," Hamketsu said as he continued to walk off. Fainar slowly pulled himself up and started to follow him, giving a small laugh as he did. "I'm not whining," he said under his breath. Fainar followed Hamketsu back into the village, where they entered a large wooden cabin. He couldn't help notice that all of the other yetis stood so much taller than Hamketsu and younger. All of them showed him mountains of respect wherever he went, all of them seeming to wait on his hand and feet. He never expected it, and he was always kind to his younger yeti. Fainar was determined to find out his history one of these days. Hamketsu has taken him to stay with Fayu, who was charged with looking after him while he was not training. It was now mealtime. Moreover, Fainar was glad to hear it. Luckily they had special seats for small people, so that they could fit around the huge table. Hamketsu was also sat in such a chair on the huge table, as he himself was only small like Fainar. Fayu, and it turns out Fayu's wife had laid out a massive feast of all sorts of food for them. Fainar was more surprised that Fayu had a wife, to be honest. They all sat around the table and started to eat, telling Fainar to dig in. Of course, he did so and stuffed his face full with as much as he could eat. "I always say Fainar is the one who eats the most who will always win in a fight," Fayu shouted between mouthfuls of food. His wife didn't seem impressed and instead turned to Fainar. "So Fainar, Fayu has told me much about you. How's your training going with Lord Hamketsu?" she asked. She was much smaller next to Fayu, but seemed just as well built with just as much hair. If not for the softer features, Fainar would honestly not have recognized she was a female yeti. "The boy has much to learn. But he's not dead yet, so that's a plus," Hamketsu said, interrupting. Fayu's wife looked at Hamketsu and gave a small smile. Now Lord Hamketsu, you mustn't joke about such things," she said, almost telling him off. The more Fainar got to know the old bastard, the more he reminded him of some crackpot old geezer. But he knew he was much more than that. "Make sure you rest well tonight, little Yuki. Your training only gets tougher from here," the little yeti said, his eyes seeming intense. It didn't help the fact that everyone else in the room also became a little tense, as if they knew what was to come. Fainar decided to ask Fayu to see if he could work anything out. "How come you can't use Sage Mode, Fayu?" Fainar asked. Fayu almost choked on his food, and he had to bang on his large chest with his fist. Once he recovered, he swallowed the food and took a deep breath, putting the large slab of meat back on his plate. To become a sage takes years of intense training and focus, Fainar. Most who try usually don't make it, and well, he seemed to struggle to get the rest of his words out. "They die," Hamketsu said, finishing Fayu's sentence for him. Fainar didn't seem shocked and continued to eat his food. "What about the ones that don't die? I mean, there must be more than one of you that can use Sage Mode," he asked. Fayu laughed as he picked his food back up. "We're a proud clan, Fainar. Those of us who decide to take that path don't give up," Fayu said, taking another large bite of his food. Fainar went quiet for a little while, taking a sip of his water. He remembered that Shim, his grandfather, had apparently tried to learn the sage arts but had failed. "Can you tell me what happened to Shim?" Fainar asked. Fayu looked at him and then to Hamketsu, who took a sip of his tea. "Ah, yes. Where to begin with little Shim?" he said, placing his teacup back down. "It was around 25 years ago now. Shim was a young man, a great warrior among his people if I remember. He had proven himself among the Yuki clan, earning the right to form a contract with our clan. Believe it or not, back then, we had a very close relationship," he said as he took another sip of his tea before he continued once again. Little Shim seemed smarter than the others. He was very aware, always picking up on things faster than others. Then one day, he came to me to ask for power. A power that could help his clan and change the land of water for the better. If I remember correctly, it was not long after the First Great War. The world was hostile and battles raged everywhere, especially in the land of water. The Yuki clan were one of the more powerful clans at the time, but that made them a target. Others would form alliances to fight them. What is the saying? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Something like that, the old yeti said. Our kind were feared and battled hardened warriors. For such, we became a prize for others to slay. My father knew your grandfather well and fell in battle. Fayu said with a heavy sigh. Fainar was astonished at what they were telling him. He had no idea about any of this and found it very interesting. So that's why you went into hiding? Fainar asked. Fayu nodded. The more and more time that pasted, the more conflict that followed, and soon our kind had taken many casualties, our home had been invaded, and we had no choice but to flee. Hamketsu nodded, showing sorrow as he did. Those were dark times, he said, the air becoming heavy from the despair and the memories. Final decided to break the silence by asking more about Shim. So what did Shim do? He asked. Hamketsu collected his thoughts and continued with his story. Yes, little Shim. He came to me asking for power, the kind of power that could change the Yuki clan, and bring peace to the land of water. You see, little Shim wanted to put an end to the fighting. He tried to raise up and stop the blood that had been spilled between clans. But his current powers and position could only sway others so far. But as I have said, trying to learn the arts of Sage Mode is no easy task. Little Shim failed the tests and chose to leave, deeming that his life was not worth the risk. Hamketsu said. After that, he promised that he would lock the secrets of summoning our clan away, only giving it to those who were worthy. We have not seen a member of the Yuki clan since. Until you appeared on my doorstep, asking the same as your grandfather. Hamketsu said, giving a smile. Suddenly Fayu's wife stood up from her chair. Now that's enough of this. I think it's time we finished our food and got to bed. Fainan needs his rest, after all. She said, putting an end to the conversation. The others agreed, and Fayu also stood to his feet. That's right. Nothing will come of talking about the past. I suggest you rest up, take a hot bath and get some sleep, Fainan. Fayu said. Hamketsu also nodded his head. That's right, little Yuki, get some rest. Who knows what tomorrow will bring? He said, almost menacingly. With that said, Fainan went and took a bath, allowed his body to soak in hot water. His muscles were aching like never before, and he had to say he missed having chakra. After his bath, he went to his room, where he had a bed and blankets provided made of soft fur. They were even better than his own back home, and he was adamant he would take them back with him when his training was complete. All that was left now was to sleep. He had to relax his mind and body to be ready for what was to come tomorrow. For he knew his training would not be easy, and he had to be prepared for anything. And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. Hunt ahead. Salute.